"I am summoned to the ministry. Because of you, our whole university is in trouble," said the rector. Grace realized that there would be no constructive conversation. She paused for a moment, so as not to say too much to her boss, but he continued the conversation. "Grace Wright, I'm going to tell you what's going on, and then you can make up your own mind. If you'd asked who Clark was, would anyone have told you that his father was a trustee of the university? You know, we can't mess with a man like that," the chancellor said and spread his hands. "And that I should continue to endure all this shame?" Grace asked. "If the question is so drastic, I offer you two options. The first one is that you will be dismissed at your own will. The second one is that you will be forced to resign by article," said the rector. Grace was furious at this injustice. She had lost all hope of defending her reputation. She left the chancellor's office and went straight to the personnel department to write a letter of resignation. In a couple of hours, she had lost her favorite job and her dream associated with it. At home, Logan found her lying in bed with a large piece of cake behind the TV screen. "It's atypical of you," he said. "How do you feel about your potential wife being unemployed?" Grace asked. "Well, let's say she's temporarily unemployed, in which case everything is acceptable. But if she's just doing nothing, it's bad. We might even have to break up," Logan said. Grace immediately realized that her potential husband wasn't going to support her in her time of need, and that was an added blow to her. Chapter 6. Grace now sends resumes to other universities all day long and waits to hear back from them. And still no response. One random phone call became her last hope of getting a new job. "Grace Wright, we've reviewed your resume and are scheduling you for an interview tomorrow at 12 noon. Would that be a good time for you?" asked a sweet female voice. Yes, of course, I can even today." Grace was excited. But the interview still took place the next day. Grace held herself confidently, proudly talked about her achievements, showed her medals and diplomas. But at the end of the interview, she heard a dry answer. "We'll call you." Grace already realized that there was little hope, but she didn't understand the reason for what was happening, how a specialist with such experience and with such enthusiasm could remain unclaimed. Logan didn't understand it either. "Maybe you should expand your options. There's a supermarket around the corner that needs cashiers." "No, but what, as a temporary option? After all, the main thing is to get paid," he said. Grace felt insulted. "With my qualifications, they don't work as cashiers." She was indignant. "Look for yourself. Few people work in their specialty nowadays. Life will make you do it, so people are happy to do any job," he said. "Stop. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? It's not like I'm going to sit around forever. I've only been home for 2 weeks, and what happens if I'm home with a baby for years?" Grace was outraged. "Don't make it so complicated. Taking care of a child is one thing, but just sitting at home is another. In any case, you and I can't live on my salary alone, and you'll have to do your part, too," he said. Grace thought about his words for a long time. She expected to receive words of support and reassurance from her lover, but he was doing just the opposite. After thinking for a couple of days, she decided to take a drastic step. The next day, close to lunchtime, she finally found a new business center in the city center. There were guards at the entrance, checking every visitor thoroughly. Ah, that's how sensitive Clark is. Grace thought as she headed for his office on the 18th floor. She managed to get into his office right away. Behind a huge desk sat a skinny man of short stature, with a slight gray in his hair. When he saw the stranger, he looked away from his monitor for a second. "I'm having a serious conversation with you," Grace said from the doorway. "First of all, hello, now introduce yourself, and then we'll see if we have anything to talk about," Clark said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm your son's teacher. He's been harassing me all over the university with his dirty manipulations. As a result, I had to quit my job," Grace said. "Yeah, I've heard something like that. What's wrong with this situation? Seems fair to me. You got what you deserved," Clark said. "Do you believe those filthy lies about me, too?" Grace was outraged. "Lady, this is the first time I've ever seen you. How do I know your identity?" "I trust my son. He wouldn't lie to me," Clark said in complete confidence. "You're wrong. Your son lies to everyone, and he lied to you. And you're lying to yourself about raising a good son. In fact, you've raised a juvenile scumbag. If he's doing this now, I fear for his future. In 5 years, he'll be doing terrible things, Grace said. Lady, what kind of reaction do you expect when you tell me things like that? Once again, I take my son's word for it, and I will not have anyone disparaging him like that. Clark remained unruffled. I was counting on your experience as a parent, but now I'm convinced that you're not a very good manager or parent either. You should have looked into the incident before you took such extreme measures, because I was a valued professional before the conflict with your son. What you did was immoral, Grace said. So, young lady, you're out of line. I've gathered enough information about you to know that your moral character leaves much to be desired. You're a promiscuous woman who got into academia by mistake, some kind of misunderstanding on the part of the university administration. I helped them correct that mistake, Clark said. Grace grabbed her head and prepared to flip the huge table over onto the man's face, but he kept talking. And please don't forget that you have been offered good conditions, and this is a voluntary dismissal. And if you are not satisfied, we can reopen the matter at any time and take legal action against you for sexual harassment and abuse of your position. Is that what you're trying to do? Clark lashed out at her. Grace realized that she had hoped for this man for nothing. He had a lot of good things to say about him, but he wasn't much of a man. Why do you have to resort to threats? I'm asking you to initiate a special investigation, and I can't get a job anywhere. Grace made one last attempt, and by now Clark was running out of patience. Lady, are you going to leave the office nicely, or should I call security? He looked down at her, not hiding his obvious contempt. Grace left, slamming the office door, Clark's lauded philanthropist, her last hope dashed. It seemed the only job on the horizon was as a cashier at the supermarket around the corner. The meaningless days stretched on for a long time. Grace only had enough energy to take home candy, sit in front of the screen, and occasionally cry. On one of those days, she noticed that toward evening she was feeling anxious and panicky. It had to do with waiting for Logan to come home. She was sure that he would definitely ask if she had found a job, and then he would be dissatisfied that she did not put money into the general budget. Against the background of such conversations, the topic of the upcoming wedding gradually moved to the background, and today Logan came home furious. Are you still sitting in front of the screen? He mumbled from the doorway. But I don't just do that. I'm looking at job sites, Grace said uncertainly. But there's no sign of success, Logan said. Maybe I need a little more time. I've been going to a lot of interviews. I think I leave a good impression of myself. But they all promised to call me back, but no one has. Grace excused herself as if she were standing at the blackboard in front of a threatening teacher. What makes you so sure someone's going to call you back? Who would want an employee with a questionable reputation? Logan went on a tirade. At that moment, Grace was confused. She wanted more than anything to keep the false article on the website with her picture out of his sight. It seemed to be too late. Logan snatched the laptop out of her hands, opened the page, and turned the monitor toward her face. How do you explain that? Wasn't I enough for you? Was there something wrong with me? And how could you not be ashamed to mess with students? He shouted. Logan, my darling, listen to me. Do you really believe all this? It's all lies. It's a slander that's been organized against me, Grace pleaded. Unconvincing. Then you said the students dislike you because you're principled. And now it turns out that they're plotting against you, your words spreading day after day. I don't see how I can marry a girl like that, said Grace. But I was hoping you'd hear me and support me. And now I'm wondering if I need a husband like that. You're no better than the corrupt chancellor and the cynical Clark who goes along with his scoundrel son, Grace said. Logan wasn't in control of his emotions at this point. Grace's attempts to explain what was right made him even angrier. Word by word, the argument turned into a huge conflict. Grace came to her senses when she felt a heavy fist slam into her face. She realized she would not be heard here. There was no use in talking any further. She tried to convince Logan to continue the conversation another day, but that didn't work either. He ended up helping her pack her suitcase. And also her snow-white wedding dress flew down through the window when the grandmothers were sitting on the bench. That's how Grace actually ended up in a new rental apartment in a new neighborhood. She'd convinced herself with all her might that the terrible times were behind her, but a chance encounter with Clark in the elevator had sown her doubts. Losing hope for a new and peaceful life, Grace decided to forget herself with her favorite book. Her hands first reached for Levitsky's novel about the struggle between good and evil, and she was not mistaken. A phrase from the novel was very appropriate: the power of personality is available to few. But if God honors someone with this gift, from that moment the power begins to manifest itself in his life. At first, the power looks like evil. It destroys everything that man has created before with blood and sweat. Man is lost. His idea of good and evil suffers a total collapse. It seems to him that his life has turned into a dark night, and he feels himself not a master but a blind kitten. Only a little later it becomes clear that in this dark night there was a deep meaning. And the meaning was to tear down everything old and help man build a whole new world in which he sets the rules. In this way, power begins to manifest itself through this man, Levitsky writes. Despite all Grace's resentment and anger, these lines gave her hope. My God. It's like this author is reading my mind, she thought as she put the book aside deep into the night. Unemployed, without money, battered by life, disappointed in the world, Grace in her new apartment dreamed of one thing only: as little as possible to cross paths with this unpleasant man Clark. Despite his active attempts to approach her and talk, she managed to retreat every time in time. However, another unpleasant encounter took her by surprise. Grace strolled aimlessly through the city that afternoon, then chatted with her friend Abigail before walking home in the evening in a melancholy mood. She was met at the door by a young man with a beard. Grace's reaction to the encounter was even more acute this time than the last. The last thing she wanted was Jaden's rapist in her life. When she met his gaze, Grace drew back sharply. Thoth noticed her reaction. He approached her with determination. Grace, wait a minute. We need to talk, he said. Don't take another step toward me, and I'll call for help. Call the police. You'll go to jail this time, Grace said, while she frantically searched her purse for pepper spray with one hand. Give me just a few minutes, if you give me a chance to speak up. I promise to disappear from your life forever. I never meant you any harm, he said. Grace still didn't believe his words, but Jaden was persistent. There's nothing to talk to you about, Grace said as she calmed down a bit. And I suggest that you pick a crowded place to talk, and I understand what you're going through. Believe me, I've been thinking about it all these years, Jaden said to her surprise, a force that made Grace calm down a little and listen to Jaden. But she didn't dare let him get closer than 3 meters. Stay there and quickly say what you wanted to say, she said, when she was sure that Jaden was indeed looking at her with guilty eyes. I didn't hurt you then. Yes, I was an idiot in their company. But I didn't hurt you personally, Jaden said. Why are you telling me all this? I've long since forgotten everything, and I'm not interested in the details, Grace replied. I'm telling you all this because I came all the way from the village to find you and talk to you, Jaden said. Grace decided to give him a chance to finish his sentence. Their conversation continued a few minutes later at a coffee shop near her house. They continued their conversation at a coffee shop near her home. All these years I've been blaming myself for taking that money. Yes, it was a small sum, but we were young idiots. None of us had a penny in our pockets that day, and you were sitting on a bench with a friend, talking about money. That's when one of my comrades offered to make a profit off you. I could have stopped them, but I was a fool myself, Jaden said. The more he talked, the more Grace felt angry, but Jaden begged her to listen to the end. You shouldn't be upset that those 2 idiots didn't get punished specifically for you, but they got the full brunt of it. A little while later they got into a fight, and one killed the other. The other one got a life sentence for murder. I made friends with them right after you came to our dorm with a knife in your hands, and then I tried to find you and apologize, but the university said you were on leave, in the hospital, and everything. Jaden barely got out a word. I had to spend almost a year in rehab because of you idiots. Then 2 more years of psychotherapy, or I would have killed the 3 of you or myself, Grace said calmly. I'm aware that these cases don't go away. I got my punishment too. I married for love, but my wife cheated on me, and I put up with it for a long time. Then she left me and went away. I never tried to make a life for myself again, Jaden said. But if that's all you've got, I'm going to go ahead and consider that I've heard you. But I can't promise complete forgiveness, Grace said, stood up abruptly from the table and gathered herself to leave. Jaden's words of remorse plunged Grace back into the nightmares of those days. No, she hadn't cared about the night's incident in the alley. Her heart ached most for her love for David. All these years later, she has lived with the certainty that her life would have turned out very differently with David. A couple days later, Jaden showed up at her driveway again. Grace felt no emotion for him this time. "You haven't left yet?" she asked idly. "I have one important thing left to complete," Jaden said. Then he unbuttoned his jacket, reached into his belt pouch, fiddled with something there for a long time, and pulled out a thick wad of money. "Remember, it all started because of that money? I don't know how else to redeem myself, so I decided to do this, at least to make up for your suffering. Even though money can't erase it," he said, holding out the sum. It was unexpected for Grace. She listened to her heart for a moment, but it was silent, meaning that there was nothing sacred in this act for Grace. So she took the money and put it in her bag. An unemployed person would not need help. Then she and Jaden said goodbye and promised each other never to cross paths again. When Grace received another job rejection, it was the 4th month of her unemployed life. Now the job as a supermarket cashier was starting to appeal to her more and more. She was ready for it, but her friend Abigail gave her another idea. "Wouldn't you like to learn some interesting profession, manicure for example, or makeup artist? You'll earn good money, and you can come back to your profession later, when everything is forgotten," she advised. Grace liked the idea. That same day she found a makeup course and enrolled. She enjoyed the learning process even more. Life was starting to get better, although the main surprises of fate were still ahead of her. Chapter 7. On one of those very ordinary evenings, Grace was disturbed by a knock on her apartment door. She wasn't expecting company, and when she opened the door, she saw the person she least wanted to see. Lucas Clark was standing there with a bouquet in his hands, followed by his son Aiden. "Grace Wright, you and I have something to talk about. Can we have your attention for a few minutes, please?" said Clark's SR, as kindly as possible. "I have nothing to talk to you about," Grace mumbled, and was about to close the door, but he wouldn't let her. He held the door open with his hand and continued to insist. "There's been a very unpleasant incident between us. We must discuss it. If you don't want to let us into your apartment, please come to our apartment. We will be glad to see you as honored guests," Lucas Clark said. Grace realized she wasn't going to get away from this family. She decided to listen to them. "The incident with your dismissal was a big misunderstanding. After your visit, I decided to double-check what had happened and did my own investigation. I gathered your feedback, talked to my voice, and realized that you weren't really at fault," Lucas Clark said, and looked at Aiden meaningfully. The one stood as if dipped in water, his usual insolence seeming to fade away with the ends. Without making his father wait long, he said the right words. "Grace Wright, you'll forgive me, please. It was me who set it up because I was afraid of my father. If I didn't pass the exam, he would punish me severely," Aiden said. "I'm very happy for you. If that's all you've got, good night. All talk between us is over," Grace said, not wanting to watch this pathetic spectacle. But Lucas Clark didn't seem to have said everything yet. "I'm aware that you couldn't get a job at any of the universities in this city. Was it because of that unfortunate article against your reputation? I made a request to this resource. My guys found out that the article was commissioned and now it has been removed. I also helped to have your data removed from the blacklist of applicants," Lucas Clark said proudly. "How noble of you," Grace snarled. Then she bowed naively in front of him and asked the father and son to leave. But that was not all. "I'm very sorry that you had to go through such difficulties. I imagine you've been very bitter, and it's only fitting that we should compensate you for your suffering," Lucas said. Then he pulled a thick envelope out of his pocket and handed it to Grace. Grace was in no hurry to take the money, but Lucas Clark politely placed the envelope on the hallway nightstand, walked his son home, and then continued his conversation. "If you need a job, I am ready to give you a decent position in my company. I guarantee favorable conditions and an above-average salary," he said. Grace liked that idea better. She was also seething with anger and a desire for revenge against this family. What else could she think of to do? "But not as a secretary or a manager. Can you offer me something more serious?" she asked. "Great. I'll see you in my office tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We'll discuss all the nuances and, if anything, we'll get down to business, he said. Grace kept her word, and the next day, at the appointed time, she was waiting for him at his office, with the position quickly decided. Lucas personally introduced Grace to his staff. She was now combining her courses with her new job. In the evenings, Grace thought of ways to teach Aiden a lesson, so that he wouldn't be tempted to do mean things again. But the course of events had taken a sudden turn in another direction. Lucas began to show more attention to Grace day after day. She made no secret of her dislike for him, and never missed a chance to remind him of how badly he'd raised his son. I'm beginning to realize that I missed out on raising my son and daughter. After my wife died, I tried to do everything to please them, but I think I overdid it somewhere, he confessed. After learning of her family's hard fate, Grace began to forget her plan for revenge. But her relationship with Lucas Clark's daughter, who worked for his company, was not working out. Grace didn't know the whole truth yet about willful Charlotte that evening. Grace finished work early and rushed to her classes. Suddenly, she was stopped by a male voice somewhere nearby. "What are you doing here?" Grace looked around, and not far away from her, she saw Logan heading determinedly toward her. First of all, hello. She was confused. "I'm asking you, what are you doing here?" he asked, catching her elbow painfully. "I actually work here. What are you doing here? Or are you following me?" She snickered. "I have to. If you work here, you're going to have to quit," Logan said. "Why all of a sudden? Why are you so nervous?" "Actually, Lucas investigated me and made sure I wasn't guilty of anything. He offered me a job at his company as compensation." "What's your involvement in this?" she asked, looking him in the eye. Logan didn't want to answer her questions. He let go of her hand, and she walked on in utter bewilderment. Not 3 days later, Grace and Logan ran into each other again. This time the encounter took place in the office hallway. Logan again took her by the arm, pinned her against the wall, and demanded that she quit immediately. The scandal between them had no sooner erupted than Grace saw Charlotte rushing toward them with anger and bewilderment. "So did you guys kind of find each other after all?" Charlotte said, looking Logan in the eye. Then she slapped him smartly. "Charlotte, it's not what you think. I didn't realize she'd barged in here myself. I'm just trying to work things out with her." "Give me a chance to explain." Logan was stunned. Grace now understood everything. There's something between Logan and Charlotte. But it was impossible to talk to those evil people. Grace threw both of them a scornful glance and headed for the principal's office. There she took a piece of paper and wrote a letter of resignation. Lucas Clark was genuinely perplexed. "I know I've interfered with your work here. Charlotte, I saw your Logan by chance a long time ago. Then she got me to hire him here on her own. I can see they're building a relationship out of sand. What can you do when your daughter's pregnant?" Lucas said and spread his hands. "I sympathize with you. You missed out on raising not only your son but your daughter as well. Now sign my application," Grace said, and finally got her way. She left Lucas's office with a feeling of deep satisfaction and barely perceptible gloating. Lucas Clark had a serious crush on her. Now he's trying to win her affection. Grace wasn't interested. Every evening she hurried home to open her favorite novel about the struggle between good and evil by the mysterious writer Levitsky in the silence of the night, and it gave her more strength than her real life at that moment. Chapter 8. Meanwhile, the writer Edward Levitsky became gravely ill at his country home. His assistant thought Vanessa Hill insisted that he should return to the city, where he had a warm and well-appointed apartment where his beautiful wife Catherine could take care of him. Wouldn't an unfinished house within the city limits be heated? Edward, for some reason at the beginning of winter, had the idea to move here. It's been less than a month since he felt ill and still can't recover. "Edward Andreevich, your stubbornness is out of line. You need to either finish this house and bring in the heating, or winter in a warm apartment," Vanessa Hill told him once again with concern. "Vanessa, I'm very grateful for your concern, but now is not the time for me to think about myself," Edward said, tightening the scarf around his neck at his desk. "I get it. It's your publisher pushing you around again. If you don't take care of yourself, your readers have more to lose than the delay in the publication of your new novel," Vanessa said thoughtfully. You think something might happen? Something bad? Edward stared at Vanessa, an older woman. Vanessa Hill knew this oddball's disposition well. He was as stubborn as 3 donkeys and as naive as a 5-year-old child. When he asked questions, they were sincere. By doing so, he set an example to others of an exploratory attitude toward the world. Vanessa Hill respected him for that. But of course, your health must come first. What if you suddenly catch some serious illness? What if it becomes impossible to keep writing? Do you feel the connection? Vanessa Hill asked. Vanessa, you're a genius. Why didn't I think of that before? All right, get my stuff and call a driver. I'm going home. I'll call Catherine myself. You pack too. He'll drop you home on the way. You must be cold here too, he muttered. Vanessa Hill raised her hands to the heavens in amazement that after 2 months of repetition she had finally managed to get through to Edward. He promised Vanessa that he would finish the rest of the novel in the apartment. When Edward called, his wife Catherine did not pick up the phone. He was used to his wife often spending time on her own, and she didn't always have the desire to take his calls. But my visit will be a surprise for my family. Now my son and wife won't have to travel miles every 3 days to be with their father. What a brilliant idea Vanessa gave me. He thought happily as he rang the doorbell of his own apartment. Catherine opened it and froze on the threshold. Grandma Mia and Grandma Emily, the main guardians of the entrance, were sitting on the bench as usual, discussing the mores of young people. And then something absolutely unimaginable happened. From the open window of the balcony of the 3rd-floor apartment first came an angry male voice. Then something white and shiny flew down, followed by something else white and airy. The grandmothers looked at the spectacle and were baptized one by one. In just a couple of seconds, the snow-white wedding dress landed right on Grandma Mia's blooming rose garden. The veil that flew out of the window after the dress never landed. It caught on a tree and was left fluttering in the wind. What kind of Satanism is this? Granny Mia muttered. The Baba in the valley appeared to have a ready explanation for this. At that moment, the door of the entryway opened, and a girl with a bloody face appeared. She roared, one hand wiping the blood from her nose. And then Grandma Emily seemed to understand without words. She began to clear her friend's head. I told you right away that there was something wrong with that girl, she said, glancing contemptuously at the girl who was trying to drag her huge suitcase across the entryway. Also, pardon the Lord, Baba Mia asked in a whisper. It looks like she will. She's a bitch, Emily whispered, keeping her eyes on the girl. It all makes sense now. What did that ace Logan see in her? A decent-looking Logan, the kind of guy who can just finger a coin to make girls fly to him like flies to cutlets. Well, if his eyes can't see normal girls, then he's a fool, her friend echoed. I wouldn't say that. Once I was walking from the market with a bag in my hands. This guy took the bag, helped me carry it to the door, and I took a close look at him when he turned around and was about to leave. It doesn't smell like vodka or cigarettes. He smells nice, like some kind of imported cologne, which means he's making good money, Baba Mia said, still defending Logan. I wish I'd said so at once, so that fury was living it, said Emily. Then she wiped her chin with the palm of her hand and shook her head. Hello. Can I ask you something? The suspicious girl suddenly spoke to the grandmothers. The grandmothers looked at each other. I've got a dead cell phone. I need to call a cab. Can I use your phone? Can I use your phone? The girl asked. Baba Mia silently took out her cell phone and handed it to the girl. She took a mirror and a napkin out of her purse and cleaned herself up. Meanwhile, the broad's curiosity had reached its peak. Beats means he loves. He will come running after a couple of days, said Baba Mia, looking at the girl. Are you kidding me? She does. That means he'll never love me, she replied. The women realized the conversation wasn't going well. Judging by her behavior, the girl really seems to be a bitch. Unscrupulous, lying for so long, looking me in the eye. How stupid was I? A man's voice came from the balcony. The girl looked up and said to Logan, Fulfill my last request. Send me Levitsky's book. It's left on the bedside table in the bedroom. It's very important to me. I don't want to hear from you, the boy muttered back and disappeared out the window. The girl started sobbing again as the cab pulled up. She quickly got up and loaded her suitcase into the trunk. "And don't you dare come back in disgrace. You trampled on my feelings. I'll never forgive you for that." A man shouted from the balcony. "You're doing the right thing, son. Let them go to all four corners." Grandma Emily encouraged him. The snow-white wedding dress remained hanging on the rose bushes until it was snatched at night by homeless people who were celebrating another grand event in the playground near the apartment building. And the veil for a few more days developed in the wind, until a strong gust did not tear and carried it away in the direction of garbage cans. It had been 3 days since Grace had moved in with her friend Abigail. The black eye was less noticeable, but she still didn't dare walk around without her oversized sunglasses. That afternoon, she managed to find herself a rented apartment. In the evening, Abigail's friend and her friend helped Grace move into her new apartment. "Abby, thank you so much. The housewarming party will be in the next few days." "I need to calm down a little and get a grip," Grace said as she saw Abigail off with her friend. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to contact us." Her friend said goodbye, kissed her on the cheek, and left with her boyfriend. Grace walked into the entryway with her head down, so that her new neighbors wouldn't see her in such an unsightly state. Pressing the elevator button, she hurried to get inside as quickly as possible, but the elevator was busy. While she waited for it, the entryway door opened and someone else came to the elevator as well. Grace glanced at her feet and noticed it was a man wearing expensive shoes. No sooner had she pulled her face away than the man recognized her. "Grace, what a surprise. You're here. What brings you here?" "I've been looking for you," the man asked. Grace mentally rolled her eyes and prayed that this unwelcome man was just a random guest. It was even more frustrating that he addressed her by her first name and even in the first person, as if they'd known each other for 100 years. "I just happened to be visiting here," she said. "How lucky you are to be visiting. Why don't you come over to my place? I live here on the 5th floor. "I live here on the 5th floor. "What floor do you live on?" the man asked. "I'm on 5th, too," Grace replied irritably. "What a coincidence. It's a sign from above that you should definitely come visit me. Or can I come where you came?" the man asked, smiling sincerely with his big stray eyes. Grace lost her temper at his insistence. "I don't want to see you or hear from you. This meeting is some accidental misunderstanding, and this is the end of our nice conversation. Consider that today you haven't seen me and I haven't seen you. It's better for my well-being. And yes, I actually live here now. I hope you'll be a good neighbor to me, who doesn't bother my eyes and doesn't bore me with your company. Thank you for everything," Grace said. She walked into her apartment and slammed the door shut. Lucas Clark was as happy as if he'd seen his own mother's reflection. He didn't care that the conversation with the girl wasn't going well. He'd expected that he wouldn't be able to connect with her right away, so he was more than determined. "We'll be sure to meet soon," Gracie said, looking after her. She was ready to burst with anger that she had to see him, and the whole story had started long before in a seemingly ordinary reality. Chapter 2. First-year student Grace discovered today that there was only a little bit of money left. She hadn't yet learned how to manage her own budget. Grace imagined her mother's tone when she would once again ask her to wire her money. The last time her mother had sent money was exactly 4 days ago, and it had been a pretty decent amount. Her mother's first question would be, "Where did you spend all that money?" Where did she really spend it? Grace sat down on a park bench and began to think about her spending. But nothing came to mind. In the last 4 days, she'd gone to a cafe with her friends 3 times, gone to the store twice, and bought a couple of bones she hadn't had time to take the tags off, and then a manicure. That's the end of the money. You need to buy food and cook at home. It's healthier, tastier, and more economical. I had such a conversation with my mother recently. Grace was going to live like that from now on, but then a friend called and asked her to go to a new club that had recently opened, and they're handing out flyers for students. How can you say no to that? Her mother's advice stayed right where Grace was sitting at that moment. After thinking for a few minutes, she came up with a solution. Grace wouldn't ask her mother for money yet. She would have to wait for her mother to call her and ask if she had the money, but she could borrow some from Amelia from the nail salon, whom Grace had met recently and had become friends with. "You're a student. You don't have to be shy. I'm always here for you. You're a student. You don't have to be shy." "I'm always here to help," Amelia said, and her words warmed Grace's soul. Grace wordlessly pulled out her cell phone and dialed Amelia's number. "Oh, what people. And I was just remembering you, telling my friend what a cheerful and kind girl you are," said Amelia. "That's it. Who's your friend? Why are you telling him about me?" Grace wondered. "You see, the thing is, David works abroad, his parents are here, and he doesn't come here much. And this time his mother urges him to find a girl and introduce her to his parents. And that's what they said," Amelia said. "I'm sorry, Light, but it's too early for me to think about a relationship. I have to finish my studies, get a job, and then I'll think about my love life. Did I ask you to find me a fiancé?" Grace was a little indignant. You're a little girl. You'd think you'd be married against your will right now. We're talking about a girl, just a girl you can introduce as a friend." "Well, if you're not interested in a guy like David, that's fine. He won't be alone," Amelia said. No, I don't mean that. That's not what I meant to say." Grace remembered that she was going to borrow money from Amelia and felt bad for rejecting her new acquaintance. "So that's it, huh? Maybe you're ready to just chat with him?" Amelia clarified. "Yeah, I'm ready. I just have a favor to ask of you. If you could lend me some money. My mom will make me a transfer soon, and I'll give it to you," Grace said. "It's a solvable problem, so write down the address. There's a restaurant on the waterfront above the new business center. In 2 hours, David will be waiting for you there. You'll recognize him. He'll be wearing a blue velvet jacket, and he has bottomless green eyes," Amelia said, and hung up the phone. What a thing to want money and get a foreign fiancé, Grace marveled. Grace still didn't know the city well, so she found her destination with great difficulty. There weren't many people in the restaurant. A guy in a blue velvet jacket with stray green eyes sat at a table near the window. Seeing him from afar, Grace immediately felt a sense of gratitude for her new friend Amelia. She had never met such an attractive guy before. Grace froze with excitement for a moment. Suddenly, David stood up from his seat and walked towards her. "Hello. Grace, I presume?" he asked the next moment, displaying a charming smile. Kira nodded her head faintly. David leaned over slightly and kissed her hand, then made a broad gesture inviting her to the table. Grace felt like she was at a fancy reception as the guest of honor. "You'll forgive me if I act clumsy, I'm nervous. It's been a long time since I've sat at a table with a girl," David admitted abruptly. "How so? You're so interesting, so attractive. The girls must be chasing you in droves," Grace said immediately, embarrassed by her clumsy compliment. David only smiled and said, "And I'm not that kind of guy. I don't like to play with women's hearts. A man shouldn't lose his dignity in the race for a woman's recognition," he said. Grace didn't understand anything he said, and when they brought the menu, she was stunned, looking at the unfamiliar names of the dishes. David noticed this and gracefully turned the situation around. "Can we have your specialties and a couple of salads that the ladies prefer? Do you think that's okay, Grace?" he asked. Grace was glad she wouldn't have to worry about the correct pronunciation of the fancy names of the dishes on the menu. They chatted about everything, then David decided to talk about the serious stuff. "When I was in high school, I always came home late at night. My father was not happy. My mother scolded me, but I was unreformable, and now I don't regret it," he said. "Have you been hooliganizing, probably going behind the garages with your friends and smoking?" Grace asked. David smiled again. "No. After school I would run to the library, and there, out of greed, I would choose several books at once, sit and read. So I still in my school years learned to read several books in parallel. It was interesting for me to wander aimlessly on the street. And in principle, I still read less now, but I spend more time in nature or thinking alone," David said. "What kind of books do you read? Do you have a favorite hero?" David asked the least favorite question for Grace. "Now all my energy is spent trying not to fail my speech exam at the end of the semester. I've always had trouble with that. I can't think about anything else," Grace said. "And if you ever want to read a work that not only impresses you but turns your world upside down, I recommend the new novel by the writer Levitsky. He writes very poignantly about the two fundamental hypostases of our world," David said. Grace again understood nothing of his words, but silently acquiesced to him. She was not interested in hearing about some fundamental hypostasis. Such talk bored her. An hour later, David paid the waiter and they headed out together. Grace thought they were going to his parents' house now, and she decided to clarify her task. "So what do I need to tell your mom to make them like me?" Grace asked. "You're rushing things. Isn't it a little early to meet your parents?" David asked and laughed. Grace fell back into a stupor. "I thought, come on. I wasn't thinking anything. It's over. I have to go home," Grace said, and was about to leave. "Wait, there's something Amelia was passing along for you," David said. He pulled his wallet out of his pocket and took out some bills. Taking the money, Grace breathed a sigh of relief. It had taken her a lot of sweat just to borrow money from her friend. For some reason, Amelia had handed over a lot more than Grace had asked for. "Will I walk you out, or will the guy be jealous?" he asked one last time. "I don't have a boyfriend, and I won't have one anytime soon. You don't have to walk me. I'm not afraid," Grace said, and said goodbye. Grace barely made it to the last bus. She didn't pay attention to the three guys sitting right behind her, whispering to each other the whole time. When Grace reached her stop, she decided to call Amelia for some reason, distracted by the conversation. She didn't notice that the three men got off after her. "Amelia, thank you so much. Why did you give me so much?" "I'll spend it quickly and it'll take me a long time to pay it back," she said. "Actually, darling, I didn't have any money with me, so I asked David to help you, if it was all right. If anything, you can talk to him about it," Amelia said. "Ah. Your David has decided to bribe me. If so, it's not enough. Then I'll ask for the same amount tomorrow. I think he's a rich Pinocchio, and very clever and well-mannered," said Grace. Grace ended the conversation just as she approached the dark alley that ran under the archway of the apartment building. The three who were following her, and already knew that the girl was coming with the money, decided not to miss the moment. As soon as she was in the dark alley, the first quickened his step and caught up with her quickly. Grace flinched when someone took her by the elbow in the pitch darkness. "Wait, beauty, where are you in such a hurry?" said the other. And Grace felt a heavy hand slide down her body. "Get your hand out of my face. I'll scream," Grace said as the third man ripped her purse from her hands, and the first man had managed to put his hand over her mouth by then. "Will you guys teach our pretty girl a lesson?" one of them asked. "Of course we'll teach her a lesson so she won't threaten to yell at good boys next time." "And I'll be the first," said the other one, and started ripping off her shirt. Grace tried to mumble something in response, and when a heavy fist hit her in the face, she only had time to feel herself losing consciousness and falling to the hard asphalt. At that moment, the darkness was illuminated for a moment by a headlight. Grace's eyes widened as the passing cars saw the familiar face, and the would-be rapist immediately noticed it and managed to deliver a second blow with his fist to her face. The next thing that came into view was a black fog and a terrible noise in her head. This incomprehensible, eerie state lasted indefinitely, and then at some point she ran out of energy to fight on. The next time she opened her eyes was at the sound of an unfamiliar voice. Drinking themselves into oblivion and then lying in the alleys. "What have you done, my daughter? Can you stand up?" asked a bearded old man with a wrinkled face and a quiet voice. Grace saw the morning light before her eyes and felt the pain in her body mixed with the piercing cold. The old man took her hand and tried to lift her off the ground. To her surprise, Grace was able to get up. The tattered pieces of her clothes lay beside her. The old man took off his jacket and threw it over her shoulders. "We need to call the police," he said. "No, I can do it on my own." No, Grace was determined. "Whatever you like, where do you live? Come on, I'll walk you out, and my Charlie will walk while I'm on my own," said the old man, pulling on his dog's leash. "No, I'm almost at the front door. No, I'm almost there. Can you pick up your jacket here in 20 minutes? "In the meantime, I need it," Grace said, wrapping the old jacket around her waist. A piece of her short skirt, Charlie was happy to drive on the ground. On the way back from the walk, the old man picked up his jacket on the metal grate under the archway. Grace, meanwhile, walked to the bus stop, but she didn't have the patience to wait for the bus. She couldn't wait to accomplish what she had promised herself hours ago, experiencing humiliation at the hands of Jaden from the parallel group and his two companions. Jaden and his friends lived in the dorm, Grace had exchanged duty phrases with him a couple times before. The guy wasn't averse to continuing to socialize, but she didn't want that. Jayden had a sense of street culture, or lack thereof. Grace wondered how someone like that could have gotten into the university. She was met on the doorstep of the dormitory by an old woman with a scowl on her face who was shouting from the first floor that it was time for everyone to get up and air out their rooms. "What are you doing up so early?" she asked sullenly. "Do you live here? Where have you been all night?" It was October. The dormitory had only opened a couple of weeks ago. The mean janitor didn't know all the residents by sight, and Grace was lucky in that respect. "Yeah, I live here. I went to visit my grandmother." "Yeah, I have to go to my room to get my textbook," she said. The woman stared at her pale face and abrasions. Grace noticed it. "I fell 3 more days ago. The bruises haven't gone away," she said, and without waiting for approval, the woman rushed inside, trying to hold the kitchen knife as tightly as possible in the sleeve of her sweater. The woman didn't ask any more questions. She had to search all the floors for Jayden's room. It turned out that not all the tenants had had time to get to know each other, and when they finally did, she was told where Jayden lived. Grace rushed there. The door of room 6 was open. Grace stepped resolutely across the threshold and saw the same face and eyes that had mocked her mercilessly a few hours before. Only this time he was counting money when he saw Grace, and the utterly soulless, pale face of her. He froze in place. Grace took a couple steps forward and closed the door with her foot. Jayden was startled when she pulled the kitchen knife from the sleeve of her sweater. "Hey, what are you doing? This isn't a joke. Stop it. I'll get help right now," he said, stepping back. "Come on. Is it scary to live? Do you want to? And conscience will not interfere?" she said, walking slowly toward him. "Come on. If you're after the money, I'll give it back. Take it back. We just wanted to play a joke, and you're the one who started threatening to call the police." Jayden was stunned. "And now it's my turn to joke," Grace said in a nonchalant voice, and took a running aim at his belly. Blood splattered on her white sweater. "Crazy, stop it. You're going to jail," Jayden shouted. Grace was annoyed when she noticed that the blow hadn't hit him in the belly. She gripped the wooden handle of the knife tighter in her hand. Jayden crumpled as if a huge rock had fallen on him. He huddled in the corner between the nightstand and the wall and continuously begged her to stop. She landed a second decisive blow on Jayden's shoulder, and he squealed like a dog kicked by a passerby. Now the blood was rushing all over his body, but that wasn't enough for Grace. As she aimed for a third blow, someone grabbed her arm firmly, then snatched the knife away instantly. It was one of Jayden's roommates. "Help. A comrade is being killed. Call an ambulance. There's a mad woman here," shouted the guy. Grace crouched on the floor and watched Jayden's panic with equanimity. It made her laugh. "Killing you is not enough for me," she said in a calm tone. By that time, the people from the neighboring rooms had gathered. When they saw the pool of blood, they were horrified. The student dormitory was in an uproar, until a scowling woman sent everyone to their rooms. Grace remembers the rest of it like a dream. The police, the paramedics, the ambulance, the many faces looking at her in horror. "They humiliated me," she repeated in a whisper, looking at those faces. Grace sat on the damp floor of a jail cell and looked out the small window under the ceiling. In another corner of the cell, a woman of strange appearance was constantly going through her rosary beads. She was saying strange phrases in an incomprehensible language. "It's good for you, sitting in a jail cell with your head somewhere in your own parallel world," Grace said, barely forcing a smile out of herself. It was her first attempt at any kind of distraction from prison life in the last 16 days of her torturous life. The unfamiliar neighbor stopped her strange acts and crouched closer to her. "You should have at least asked me what I saw there," she said, her deep-set eyes sparkling. "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. You know, I'm 19 years old, and that's the end of my life. First I was abused by a group of scumbags, and then I almost killed one of them. And now prison and darkness are ahead of me. My dream was to be a philologist, to socialize with intellectuals and discuss the finer points of literature," Grace said, waving her hand in the air. "And you're wrong," the neighbor said, showing off her toothless smile. "You think I'm having fun? No, I'm looking into the future. You're not going to sit down. You have powerful patrons. Right now he's running around, hustling, negotiating, approving things. There's a lot of people who sympathize with you, but you're going to have to do better than that. You will have to find the strength to defend your truth. The stars are on your side," said the woman. "I'd like to think so, but I don't believe in fortune-telling," Grace said, and lay down on the metal bed. The next instant both were alarmed to hear the heavy chains on the metal door open. Then a prison guard entered the cell. He looked at Grace and made a gesture to let her know she needed to get out. Grace sighed. She knew there would be another hours-long interrogation where she would have to recount all the shame she had experienced at the hands of the scumbags. A few days ago, she was ready to go to jail without trial to avoid those unpleasant conversations with various investigators. But this time she hadn't guessed. "You have a visitor," the guard said quietly, leading her into the visiting room. There was a bald man in a suit and glasses. He introduced himself as her lawyer. Grace was surprised because she knew that her mother wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer, but the lawyer decided not to discuss it. He went straight to the heart of the matter. "You were in a state of extreme agitation. You were in a state of extreme agitation. We will insist on it. We have every chance of success. Moreover, the victim has no claims against you and is ready to publicly apologize," he said. "Apologize?" Grace smirked. "Now is not the time for emotions. You'll have to deal with the rest of your problems after the trial. We need to be well prepared," said the lawyer. And yes, despite Grace's deeply pessimistic attitude, the court acquitted her. However, there were new trials ahead of her, which required much more strength from the girl than to take revenge on her offender and serve time in prison. "Daughter, David's here to see you," said her mother in a whisper, looking pityingly at Grace, who had not gotten out of bed for the past day, staring at the ceiling. "Let him go," Grace said and turned her head away. This was David's fourth visit when he didn't get to talk to Grace. Every time he heard her unwillingness to talk to him, he turned around and walked away. Grace turned her attention to him and cried with resentment until the evening. Her mother was at her wit's end and didn't know how to help her daughter. This time David offered a reasonable solution. "If she doesn't want to see me, I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. In the meantime, here's the doctor's address. I should take her to him sometime. I talked to him beforehand." The doctor said it would take a long time to treat the depression, David said, leaving the card on the table. Chapter 3. Puri. After a year, Grace was doing better. She had recently recovered in her studies and had started going to university again. When she told David about it over the phone, he was overjoyed for her. "I'll make a present for you on this occasion. Wait for the courier," he said. "The best gift would be you yourself for me." "I missed you," Grace said back. They had been dating for over a year, and they both realized that they had serious feelings. David didn't promise anything over the phone, but toward evening, his mother told him that a courier had arrived, and the gift wrapping was a book, hardcover by Edward Levinsky. The book was called Light and Darkness. Grace didn't like the gift. She would have been more excited about a bottle of perfume or a box of chocolates, but David had this principle, sometimes to give unexpected gifts like this. Grace leafed through the book and put it aside, and a couple days later David called to ask her impressions of the book. "I haven't opened it yet. You'd better tell me what it's about," Grace said, waving away the discussion of high topics. "I think it's just not yet time for you to develop an interest in this book. When that time comes, you'll find out for yourself. It's a lot about you and a lot about me," David said. "All right, now I have to run to school," Grace said disappointedly, and to end the conversation quickly so David wouldn't notice her offense. "Love and kisses. Until we talk again." "Imagine meeting my parents. You don't have to play any part. Let's just tell them the truth, and they'll be very happy," David said. Grace didn't think much of their relationship, even though she loved David. She would have liked to have met him in about 5 years, when she had finished her studies and was ready for a relationship, but it was beyond her to refuse David's company. All this meant was that the young girl was in denial about her strong feelings for him. It wasn't long before she had to revisit them, and that's when the first epiphany hit her. A few days before that fateful day, David had written her a short message saying he was anxious to see her, and on the appointed day Grace had decided to go to the airport to meet him, but the expected flight never arrived. Only in the evening Grace learned from the news in front of the screen that the plane had crashed and all the passengers had died. David never contacted her again. After a while, she got the address of David's parents through Amelia and decided to visit. On the threshold of the house, she was met by a stately woman of age. It was clear from her bulging eyes that she was experiencing a great deal of grief. David and I knew each other. Actually, we had a relationship. One day he didn't come to see me, and I wanted to know the truth. Grace was slurring her words because she didn't know the exact information about him yet. "Come inside," the woman said once inside. Grace's gaze from the threshold fell on the large black-framed portrait on the wall. It was clear to Grace now David had not survived. His father and I were looking forward to his arrival. He promised to introduce us to his girlfriend. He joked that, unlike his previous promises, this time his real girlfriend was coming, and he'd bought the gift long before, his mother said, pulling a box from the nightstand, and in it were 2 rings. "Take it. This was meant for you," the woman said, and held out a smaller ring. After that, Grace did not believe in his death for a long time. But after visiting his grave, she gradually had to accept that their parting had happened forever. Then David began to live in her memories. The memories grew richer as she recalled his every word and gesture. Levitsky's book was a bright red thread in these memories, but Grace would not start reading it for a while. The last months of her university years had been the hardest for Grace. A strange longing and pain in her soul constantly distracted her from life, preventing her from enjoying it to the fullest. Her mother was worried about her. She always tried to subtly divert her daughter's attention to some outside activity. "I got a ticket to the theater, but I have other plans that day. Would you like to go with a friend?" she suggested, somehow hiding the fact that she had bought the tickets for her daughter. "It's not interesting, of course, but we can do it." "Yeah, give me your tickets. I have nothing to do for the weekend anyway," Grace said. And in her mind, a devious plan was brewing. When she got the tickets from her mother, she immediately called her friend Abigail. "Abby, I've got some stuff I can sell for a lot of money, and we can finally go to the club with the proceeds. We can find out what's so interesting and why everyone loves it so much," she said. Abigail didn't find the idea all that interesting. She declined. Grace decided to pursue the matter herself. On the day of the performance, she came to the theater not as a spectator, but with the anticipation of a new adventure. 2 tickets. 2 tickets to good seats at the best price right now. Whoever made it is lucky. Those who didn't make it, may they regret it for the rest of their lives. Grace shouted through the crowd. The buyer came quickly. A guy in an expensive shirt and a stylish hairdo, as if he had been waiting for her. "I want 1 ticket," he said, embarrassed. "Oh no, I'll only sell 2 in one hand because the second one individually would be hard for me to sell," Grace said. "I understand, but I don't need a second ticket. I came alone," the guy said, and looked at her hopefully. Grace rolled her eyes. "Well, find a date quickly. Look, there are so many beautiful girls around. You're so interesting. Is it enough for you to move your eye or lure them with your finger, so that they will come to you?" said the young girl in a businesslike manner. The boy laughed. From these cute phrases, a conversation started between them, which ended only at midnight, when he walked her home, after watching a play together. "Did you enjoy tonight?" Logan asked, looking tenderly into her eyes. "Well, nothing in general. Although I'd prefer a different kind of leisure time myself. But I got to meet you," Grace said, wishing she'd never made it to the club. "I'll call you tomorrow, and I'll call you the day after tomorrow. And the day after that, too. I wish we'd never been apart," Logan said, unable to hide his spontaneous feelings for her. She reciprocated him. It seemed that there were no obstacles in front of them, until life encountered its first trials. Chapter 4. For 2 years now, Grace has been the most principled teacher at the most prestigious university in the country. When students learn that Grace Wright will be taking the exam, their knees start to tremble a month before the date. But that's not the case for third-year student Aiden. He had recently transferred from another university and wasn't particularly fond of the unwritten laws in his new environment. "Come on. Is that a nerd or something?" "So what?" So she's a boulder? You can't get close to her, he grinned as his classmates talked about the importance of not missing lectures on speech culture. You just haven't been to her lectures yet, and she conducts them so well that even other groups ask her to attend. They sit quietly on the back of the desk and listen to the end, and if even after that they don't show interest in the subject, it's fair that she fails, his new comrades told him. I don't like it, but it's not comical for me to be afraid of some bitch. I've seen a lot more of them at my old university, Aiden grinned, and then insisted on his position as a matter of principle. Clark, you were absent from the last lecture, but you, as a diligent student, I think you have checked with your comrades on the subject of the class and have prepared properly. Come to the blackboard, Grace Wright said one day. And I, as a diligent student, have the right not to respond to topics I'm not interested in, Aiden said, and continued to sit still. Grace immediately realized that the guy was provoking her. There had been several instances of this. As the exams approached, Grace consulted with her colleagues about Aiden Clark's defiant behavior. They said that the guy was new to the group, they should give him time to get used to it, and then he'd get up to speed, but they'd obviously underestimated the new student's abilities. On the day of the exam, Grace tried her best to help Aiden succeed, but Aiden didn't make any effort at all. He was defiant as usual, ignoring her questions and taking his time to approach the teacher. Your last try. Answer any ticket you like, Grace said when her hands were down. I don't want to answer any of your fucking questions, simply because the subject is not my priority. Or do you consider my position? Or let the faculty deal with it? Why did a student fail an exam? You're the one responsible for the quality of education, which means that you haven't done your best during the semester, Clark sassed. We don't need to have a conflict, Clark, but I won't tolerate sloppiness and rudeness. If you don't want to take a chance, you'll take the retest in a month. There won't be any relaxation, Grace said. Although how another month from now I'll be vacationing in Bali. Going to parties with models and drinking martinis instead of closed statements doesn't paint your reputation, so it's in your best interest, Aiden replied. Well, Clark, I guess you and I just don't understand each other. I guess I'll have to write a report on your rude behavior, Grace threatened. And let's make a better deal amicably. As much as we need. Just write it down, Aiden said, pulling out a piece of paper and placing it on the teacher's desk. Clark, are you offering me a bribe? Grace was surprised. I see what you're getting at. Do you think you're the only saint around here? But okay, I didn't go to your lectures. Let's say I'm guilty, so I should be held accountable. That's what I'm offering, Aiden said, pushing the blank paper closer. But this is highly unethical behavior. This conversation is over, Clark. I'm not going to take any more attempts from you, Grace Wright said and pointed toward the exit. Aiden walked out of the auditorium angry. So did you pass? His classmates surrounded him. No, she failed me on purpose. Everyone answers 3 questions and she gave me 10. I answered all of them. Then she started asking questions on other subjects. And that was too much for me, Aiden said. But hang in there. Then you'll have to run after her. But they say she's less principled on the second try, his comrades consoled him. No, I don't think so. She was hinting at money, asking for a bribe. I don't tolerate that, it's immoral. I'm going to complain about her, Aiden said. Grace felt tired when she finished the exam. She went to the ladies' room to clean herself up, but when she got out of the stall and went to the mirror, Aiden blocked her way. That means it's principled. So there's no way we're going to make a deal, he asked, coming closer and closer to her. Clark, leave the ladies' restroom, Grace stepped back. No way you started this war to bring it to an end. It's a matter of honor for me, Aiden said, and then sharply pinned her against the wall and began to stretch the buttons of her shirt. Grace gathered all her strength into a fist and pushed him away from her, then, without wasting a second, ran out into the hallway. Her panic was all over her face. Aiden managed to hustle quickly, then ran out after her. The group of students in the hallway looked on in bewilderment. Look at her. Why is she so principled? She harassed me, that nymphomaniac. The other guys have told me how she's encouraged them to be intimate, threatened to fail their exams, Aiden shouted across the room. Clark, what are you talking about? What the hell are you talking about? Grace was outraged. I'm not going to let this go. Have them review this woman's behavior against the teacher's code of ethics. Everyone saw what happened. Remember. Aiden shouted. Then he threw Grace a triumphant look and showed her the buttons he'd torn off his shirt beforehand and the lipstick marks on his neck, which he'd smudged himself too. Grace expected a showdown in the administration. But for some reason it didn't happen. But her life at the university had become a living hell. Now, as she walked down the hallway, students whispered and giggled behind her. Another group, to whom she taught literature, and even distinguished themselves by their behavior. When Grace Wright called one of the students to the board, the student decided to follow Aiden Clark's example. "What can you tell us about Emily Dickinson's early work?" Grace asked the student. "I have a lot to tell you, and I'm sure you'll find it interesting. For example, from unpublished poems, so audience, cover your ears." "I'm only reading this for Grace Wright," said the student, and began to recite vulgar ditties from folklore. "So, Martin, stop explaining here, you're violating ethics." Grace tried to stop him. "How? Aren't you interested in the strawberry format? And everyone says that you are very fond of this subject. Or are you only interested in practice, drunken student?" "Martin, sit down, your behavior is outrageous," Grace said, moving from the back of the classroom to the blackboard. "But we hear you're a very good girl," said another student, and managed to slap the teacher on a soft part of his body. The whole audience laughed. Grace was furious. She ran out of the classroom, and she didn't make it back for the rest of the class. It was clear that rumors had spread throughout the university. She would have preferred to deal with Clark's incident honestly than to experience such harassment among the students, but the faculty didn't react in any way. In the evening, Logan found his beloved crying in the bathroom. "What's driving them again?" he asked. "Maybe you should take a vacation." "No, this isn't the time," she waved it away. "But I can see you haven't had a face on you in a month. I understand that this is your favorite case. You have a reputation and a place at this university, but you don't have to cling to it at all costs. Do you want me to talk to my boss? He needs a competent assistant. You'd be great. And he's paying good money," Logan suggested. "No, I'm not planning to leave the university yet. Even if I did, it would take me a while to start working again." "Don't worry about it," Grace said. Then she wiped away her tears and tried to keep her cool all evening. In addition to this incident, she was troubled by another incident that had recently happened to her. On that day, at her mother's request, she had gone to visit a friend of hers who lived on the outskirts of the city. The abandoned part of the city with its old houses reminded her of the distant past, when she had rented a room in one such house with a visiting friend. She studied with great interest and had high hopes for the future. And then there was that unfortunate day when Jaden and his fellow park benches were near her and overheard a conversation about a girl about to have money in her hands. One of these guys was a badass street hooligan who had already managed to get away with it several times before the law. He was the one who initiated that crime against Grace. Thinking back on those events, Grace noticed how physically sick she was getting. She also still felt bad that none of those guys had been punished. Grace didn't care about that. She had to heal her soul. Her mom and David were pulling her out of the clutches of depression, literally by her hair. It was all happening in front of her eyes now, like footage from a horror movie. Grace finally found the right entrance. Just as she was about to press the call button, someone from inside opened the door, and she saw a familiar face. Out of fear, she sent back. "And that's how you meet. How did you end up here?" The same Jaden from the past asked, striding toward her. Jaden hadn't been the first handsome boy in his youth either. His close-set eyes looking downcast always gave off a less than favorable impression of the guy. And now that he had grown a beard and the cheekbones of his face were even more protruding, those eyes were even heavier. "Don't come any closer. I'll call for help," Grace said as she tried to fumble for the fence on the patio. "Wait, don't be so afraid. I just wanted to talk quietly." "Give me a chance, I'll explain everything to you," Jaden said, stopping a few feet away from her. "Man, help me, please. This man is following me." Grace managed to shout in the direction of an elderly passerby. Seeing this picture, the older man headed toward them. Jaden looked around, then stepped away from her. Grace hurried to hide in the entryway. "I know where you work and where you live. I'll still find a way to talk to you. "Wait for me," Jaden said one last time. Grace thought there was a smirk in his eyes at that moment, and the words sounded like a threat. When she got to her mother's friend's apartment, it took her a long time to come to her senses. She'd heard Jaden's warnings that he knew everything about her. Chapter 5. A new day was preparing a new challenge for Grace. Today she was going to tell her students a fascinating story about the lives of prominent literary figures. She hoped that she would not allow any more mishaps or indecent behavior on the part of her students. So the topic of today's lecture can be represented by a concise diagram that is easy to remember. "I'll draw it on the board for you," Grace said, and opened the board door. She used to be sure that boorish things against teachers could only happen in schools, but now she had encountered it herself. On the blackboard hung a poster in the shape of a torn page from an adult magazine. A girl in a racy, erotic costume had Grace's face pasted on it, and all accompanied by no ambiguous comments on the board. This was the final straw for Grace. Leaving it at that, she ran to the rector's office. "William Hill, I need you to listen to me and take action." William Hill. "I am a victim of psychological bullying at the university. Permission to come with me to the auditorium and see another manifestation of this shame," Grace said. The elderly rector lowered his glasses to the tip of his nose and looked intently at the young staff member for a few seconds, then sighed heavily and followed her. "I am outraged that the harassment against me has been going on for a long time, and no one from the teaching staff is going to deal with this issue. I believe that such ethical lapses are unacceptable in academia." Grace repeated, "Until we reach the classroom." "Here, please admire," Grace said, pointing to the board with her hand. What was her surprise when, instead of the obscene poster, she saw her own scheme, which she had drawn for today's topic. And standing at the blackboard was that very naughty student, carefully explaining the essence of the scheme to the others. "I don't understand anything. It's some kind of misunderstanding," Grace whispered. The rector looked at her with even more bewilderment than he had a few minutes ago in his office. "William Hill, I didn't lie. All the students saw it." "William Hill, can they confirm it?" Grace was stunned. "And let's go to the study. We'd better agree there," suggested the rector. Grace had hoped that she would finally be able to reach the right people and get support, but she was wrong. A very different conversation took place in the rector's office. "Grace Wright, I am aware of the incident between you and student Clark. I had hoped that you would look into the situation on your own and be able to work things out with the student, but unfortunately you didn't," said the rector. "What do you mean? He's the one who slandered me and spread rumors. Shouldn't the chain of command be respected? The truth is on my side, and the student's behavior should be critically evaluated accordingly. Or does this university not honor the principle of fairness?" Grace put the question squarely on the table. William Hill ducked into his computer, opened some pages on the internet, and then turned to Grace. "How do you explain this one?" he asked. Grace saw a page of her own picture on the screen, and the students wrote in text that this teacher induces them to intimacy and in case of refusal fails them in exams. The author of the article describes in detail the incident between Grace and Clark. Grace went into a rage. "But it's not like that. You should investigate and look into the matter," she said indignantly. "Grace Wright, an investigation will not help, and the university's reputation has already been damaged. I'm consulting with experts on how to remove this material from the internet. And I'll tell you in advance, there's no consolation. Because of you." "All right. Edik, how did you get here? Why didn't you warn me beforehand?" She stared at him, tightening her silk robe in a hurry. "I kind of came home to my house." "Where's Mason?" Edward asked, taking off his coat in the hallway. But instead of Mason, an unfamiliar man came out to meet him. "All right, we didn't get to have a private dinner tonight. I'll call you later," the stranger said to his wife and kissed her on the cheek, then grinned at Edward and hurried out the door. Edward didn't like it. Of course, he knew from the beginning that Catherine was an unpredictable woman, but a strange man in the house would be too much even for her. "What are you doing in my house?" Edward whispered. "I came to my son. He's a big boy. He has the right to decide whom to call his father," said the stranger. "What son? You must have the wrong address." Edward was confused. Maybe you made a mistake at the door when you thought of the stranger's son as your own. We'll fix that soon enough, said the stranger. Then he went out. The confused Catherine was at a loss for words. Edward waited for her to explain. This is something I've suspected you of for a long time, he said in a surprisingly calm tone. Edic, it's not what you might think. The father is actually not the one who participated in the conception, but the one who raises the child. Mason loves you very much. He even looks like you. You can't give up on him. Catherine was stunned. It's not about Mason, it's about you and me. You were dating that cab driver before you even met me. Then you swore you were done with him. Then he came to Mason's daycare center. After that, you had too many issues with me. But by some miracle, we managed to avoid divorce. And now this guy's back in our lives and you're back to being an asshole. I'll have to think about it at my leisure, said Edward. Then he went to his son's room. 9-year-old Mason was happy to see his father back. They spent the rest of the evening playing games together and learning about space from books. But Edward Levitsky had a premonition that the main plot of his novel about the struggle between good and evil was inevitably beginning to materialize in his own life. He usually forgets some details quickly, but today it was important for him to recognize it. So he rummaged through his manuscripts towards midnight and found the right page. If a man has his heart set on the divine, he should be accustomed to the fact that there will be no permanence in his life. In this way, the universe teaches him not to be attached to ordinary human pleasures. It hurts, but he'll get his reward for it. That's what he wrote in his novel 7 years ago. Chapter 9. Grace had recently finished her courses and immediately found a job at a high-end beauty salon. Catherine was one of her first clients. Do you even know how to do nude makeup? I don't really trust beginners, she said at once. Don't worry, no one's complained yet, Grace murmured, worried that this client might be causing her too much trouble. It was not easy to work with her. She was always distracted by phone calls, complaining that her neck was stiff. The last phone conversation took place when Grace was finishing her makeup. Catherine wasn't thrilled with the results, but she didn't make a scene. Thank you for that. Having escorted the capricious client, Grace was just about to have a coffee when furious Catherine returned to the salon and went straight to the receptionist. Your new employee stole my iPhone. Your new employee stole my iPhone. I demand that you call the police and deal with this incident immediately. Otherwise, I will write such a review that no one will ever set foot in your building again, Catherine retorted. I didn't take your phone. You're confused about something, Grace said as she approached the receptionist. Where could my iPhone have gone? I only recently used it to talk to my husband. Then I put it in my purse, and now it's not there, Catherine said. It can't be. Maybe you put it in your pocket. The salon manager was stunned. You can also say that I stole my iPhone from myself. I demand that you examine this employee's personal belongings in front of me, Catherine demanded. The receptionist looked at Grace with a sympathetic expression on her face, but she didn't dare refuse to let her regular customers see her things. And of course, Catherine's iPhone wasn't there, but Catherine was inconsolable. Do you know who my husband is? I'll close your shop with one phone call. You'll have to run after me to earn my forgiveness. I'll complain to you, Catherine said before leaving the salon. But the administrator and owner of the salon understood the risks to the reputation of her establishment. So she invited Catherine into her office to discuss the matter with her. After a while, Catherine left, slamming the door, and the receptionist called Grace over to her. Grace, what happened? How did you make such a mistake? She asked. I didn't take her phone. Maybe I put it in the wrong place. She shrugged. I paid her money so that this scandalized woman would not make negative comments about us. But even that wasn't enough. So I had to promise to fire you, said the salon administrator. Grace laughed, and the supervisor was perplexed. I'd be happy to quit on my own. You sign my application, and I'll go pack my personal belongings, Grace said. Putting a pile of professional cosmetics in her suitcase, Grace had to freeze for a few moments, and the hysterical girl's iPhone somehow ended up in her suitcase. Only now Grace realized how everything happened. Madame had placed her phone on the edge of her table after the last conversation. Most likely she had caught it herself with her restless hand, and the phone had fallen into the case that stood on the bottom shelf of the table. Grace ran into the supervisor's office and showed her the find. "That's wonderful. I'll give you her address now. You need to take her phone to her if you can get her to forgive you." "So your dismissal is canceled," she promised. "Okay, but I have clients until tonight. I'll take her phone to her tomorrow morning," Grace promised and continued working. Chapter 10. It turned out that Catherine lived in the center of the city in a luxury apartment complex. Grace quickly found the right apartment and pressed the doorbell. But the door wasn't opened right away. After a while, she heard a man's voice sticking out. Then the door opened, and Grace was stunned on the spot. "Where the hell has he been for the last hour? I canceled a dinner party to meet you. And by the way, it was my best friend's book launch. That's it. I'm not giving you another chance. You've lost my loyalty," said the man Grace knew as the writer Edward Levitsky. Grace barely opened her mouth to explain the reason for her visit, but Levitsky immediately pulled some papers out of a folder and then one book and handed it to her. "There's my autographed book for you. As you asked for my press release here, I don't have time to deal with you today. If you want an interview, come back tomorrow at 12, Levitsky said, closed the door of his apartment, and hurried down the stairs. Grace imagined him to be different. In his works, Levitsky leaves the impression of a sensitive and mute man, but in real life turned out to be a regular neurotic. Grace was even glad that everything turned out this way, and it was a chance for her to get closer to a great talent, one could even say to her idol. Grace realized at once that Levitsky had mistaken her for a journalist from the editorial office who intended to interview him, and she was not confused about what to do next. When she left Levitsky's driveway, she sat down on a bench outside the house and dialed the telephone number of the literary magazine he had mentioned. "I'm sorry. I'm from Edward Lewinsky. He gave you a message," she said. "You must be his press secretary? That's fine, then. We're expecting his interview tomorrow afternoon. Try not to delay. We've prepared the front page for him," the publisher said, and then hung up. Grace was glad that after all this time she would have to do what she loved. She had dreamed of many things in her life, but she had never dreamed of such a thing. The next day, at the appointed time, Edward Levitsky gave an extensive interview. Grace prepared the questions for it herself. In the afternoon, she sent the finished material to the magazine's editorial office, and in the evening of the same day she received an unexpected call. It was Edward. "Grace Wright, you're a professional. I've done dozens of interviews, but I've never had such an interesting conversation with anyone. Can you please tell me if you have a couple more hours of free time to discuss the plot of my new novel? I'm almost writing it down, but I'm having some doubts about the details. I think you can give me some sound advice," said Edward Levitsky. Grace couldn't believe her ears. "Of course I can. I can do it today or tomorrow. Call me anytime you want," she said finally. From that moment on, her newly acquired profession as a makeup artist became completely uninteresting to her. Also, during these days, she forgot why she had gone to Levitsky's house. Now she waited impatiently for a call from Edward, and he didn't keep her waiting long, calling back the next day. "Grace Wright, come to my house while my son and wife are on vacation at the resort. I can give all my time to creativity. No one will interfere with us here," he said. "Wait for me in exactly 1 hour," said Grace, who had just opened her eyes and had not yet had time to drink her coffee. She decided to sacrifice her morning rituals for such a cause. The afternoon passed productively. In Grace's company, Edward Levitsky made new corrections to his novel, and then set about completing it with renewed vigor. Evening approached, but their conversations did not end. "Grace Wright, I'm sorry to be taking up your time, but how would you like to be my editor? I've been looking for a good specialist for a long time, but I haven't had any luck, so I can't let you go," Edward said. "I've dreamed of this my whole life. I'd love to," Grace replied. The same day they discussed the terms of cooperation. They worked wherever it was convenient for Edward. It could be a city park on warm days, sometimes in a suburban cold house, sometimes on a bridge over a river, and most often in his apartment. But it didn't last long like that. A couple weeks later, in the middle of a workday, they heard the sound of a door opening, and then there was a scream from the hallway. "Daddy, Daddy, we're here. Daddy, we're here." Edward interrupted and hurried to meet his wife and son. Grace was confused. only now she remembered that she still hadn't given her iPhone to Katrina. She frantically pulled the phone out of her bag and hurried to meet her as well. Seeing her in her apartment, Katrine was instantly furious. "Edek, explain to me what's going on here," she asked. "I'd like you to meet Grace Wright, my assistant and editor. She's an excellent professional and even has literary taste. We've been working together for 2 weeks now," Edward said happily. "Edek, you can be romantic in your writing, but not in your life. She's not a professional, she's a fraud and a thief. She stole my iPhone at the beauty salon. She's a makeup artist," Katrine said. "Please forgive me. I actually came to give you your phone. It was actually left in my office," Grace said, handing her the smartphone. That's how it all came to a head. When her supervisor threatened to fire her, she got scared and decided to return the phone. "Here's the physical evidence." "Edek, what are you going to say now?" Katrine asked. "Grace Wright, what's the meaning of this?" Edward asked. Grace had already regretted a dozen times that she had not told him the reason for her first visit. It seemed to her that there was little that could be changed now. "I'm sorry Catherine is telling the truth, but I was actually once a philologist, working at the university, dreaming of doing what I love, and then it all disappeared, and through no fault of my own," Grace said. "How did you end up at the beauty parlor?" Edward asked Grace. Her whole past life flashed before her eyes. She wasn't going to dive into those nightmarish memories now, so she just waved her hand and hurried to the exit. But before she did, she stopped and said the most important thing. "Edward, I loved you long before we met, and after the meeting I was convinced that I was not mistaken in my feelings," she said, and left. Hearing her words, Catherine was instantly enraged. "Ah, is that what it means? And he tells me about the editor and working together. You brought a mistress into our house and you weren't even ashamed to introduce her to me. And I won't stand for it. I'm filing for divorce," Catherine said. "I didn't have anything personal with Grace, of course, but honey, how are things with your cab driver?" Edward asked. "He and I are great. Unlike you, he's not cheating on me. And just so you know, Mason is really his son. I've been hoping for years that you'd figure it out, but I don't want to hide it anymore," Catherine said. Edward did not want to continue this unpleasant dialogue. He was more bitter about Grace and her inconsistency. The relationship with Catherine soured completely. The very next day, Catherine packed her things, took her son and left him. Edward realized that he was completely alone. It's been a month. Today, Grace finally got to the last page of that novel by Levitsky about the struggle between good and evil. She didn't like the ending. She believed in the triumph of good. But it ended in nothing. No one won. It was obvious I wasn't there. When the man wrote this opus, Grace thought, but her soul was screaming about something else. About the fact that she had never learned to tell her loved one about the unpleasant things in life and time. About the fact that she was still afraid to live life to the fullest and measured her life in small doses. As a result, she lost everything again and her favorite occupation and the person she loved. When the doorbell rang, she didn't want to open it at all, but the ringing only increased and then became continuous. When she opened the door, she saw Edward on the threshold. "Will you let me talk to you?" he asked hopefully. Grace stepped away from the door. The story of how she ended up in his house and how they then infiltrated his life turned out to be confusing, but Edward was delighted. "It's mystical, my dear. It's a sign from above, which means you and I have something to do together," he said. Grace was intrigued. "So you'll forgive me? Are we going to do this after all?" she asked. "Of course I forgive you, my dear, but let's go right now to my country house. We won't be disturbed there, and I've already brought the heating to the house. It's not so cold there." Grace didn't ask any unnecessary questions. After a couple of hours in a romantic setting, Edward has already started a new novel called The Eternal Struggle of Good and Evil. Victory was at hand. From now on, the muse was always at his side, so the novel was a success.
Mallory was born into an ordinary family. She had a mom and dad who were very happy when their baby girl was born. As the girl grew up, the family moved several times. "Lucy, come on, leave your daughter to me and go to work yourself," said the woman's mother. "Oh, I don't know, isn't it early?" the woman doubted. "Nothing, someone needs to earn money. If we wait for your husband, it will not work out." Mother-in-law disliked her son-in-law from the first day. "Okay, I'll think about it and look for a good option. My daughter still had doubts. Before getting pregnant, Lucy worked in a kindergarten. She was in good standing. But lately, her husband had started abusing alcohol. The woman did not want him to get drunk and began to sit down with him for a drink. She thought that if she did it, her husband would get less. "Ninka, where are you?" shouted at the door a friend who came to work and saw that she was not there. She immediately ran to their house. "Why are you yelling?" She opened the door. "You're going to get fired," her friend begged her. "Tell her I'm sick," Lucy begged. "You've been given so many chances." She looked at her. "I can't." She didn't even close the door, went back to bed. They didn't pity her, they fired her. No one knew she was pregnant then. "Alexander, we have to stop." They were sitting in the kitchen again. "You have to stop." "You stop," he exhaled. "I'm pregnant." She looked at him and waited for a reaction. So what? He didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. But when his wife's belly began to grow, Alexander somehow settled down. He stopped drinking heavily and started courting his wife. It took her a long time to recover from her drunken past, but by the 6th month everything was fine. "Did they fire you?" Alexander asked. She probably shrugged her shoulders. "And now what?" lamented her husband. "And you?" She still hoped that he would take the mine and start doing something. The girl was born, her parents were happy. Her grandmother, Nina's mother, came and helped her daughter with everything. And when she and her husband went back to their old ways, she tried to get her to go to work. Mallory was 3 years old when she was put in kindergarten. Lucy never got a job. But now she and her mom were sitting at the table together. "I'm so sick," her daughter told her. "Why?" The mother was getting drunk fast. "I don't know." She held her head. Alexander had come to his senses by this time. He looked at the drunken women and didn't want to continue. He was now working as a watchman in a warehouse. "Stop it." My husband yelled at Lucy at home tonight. "Why are you yelling?" She'd get up from the table. "Fuck you." The child is growing up without a care, and they are sitting around, the man resented. When Mallory was 3, her grandmother had been paralyzed. Now she was lying in bed. Lucy didn't do anything. She just wasn't able to. The sick woman screamed a lot. The neighbors heard it, but no one took action. "This is what your drunkenness has brought to." Alexander stayed in the apartment, but there was no family anymore. He found out that there was an organization in town that could take in a sick woman. He started the paperwork. But perhaps from malnutrition, or the fact that there was no treatment, she died. "You don't even care now?" The husband yelled at his wife, and she sat in the kitchen, shaggy, in a faded robe. "Go on," she waved him away. "I'll go and see what happens to you." He fought the woman's drunkenness as best he could. "And that's none of your business." She could no longer see him well. Mallory was 7 years old. She went to school. But it wasn't all white bows and pretty uniforms. She'd always been pretty in kindergarten. Her mom had always made her pretty. And now, a crumpled uniform, a ponytail that she'd somehow braided herself. "Mallory, why do you look so unkempt?" her teacher asked her. She didn't have time. The girl didn't know what to answer. She was defending her mother. "What do you mean?" She didn't have time. "Your mom should be doing it." The woman was indignant. "She's sick," the girl said guiltily. "And what was it?" I wondered. A lot of people in town knew what Lucy was doing. Mallory suffered. She would first come home, sit down beside her mother, who was asleep, and stroke her head. "Mommy, I'm hungry," she would sometimes say quietly. Her father was often not home, and the girl would eat what was in the refrigerator or on the table. Mallory, a man would come in the morning from the shift. "Daddy, I'm so hungry." She was wobbly. "Here, take this." He'd hand her a bun. They used to make fun of the girl at school. She was always forgetting everything, sitting on the last desk. She didn't answer in class, studied very badly because there was no supervision at home. "If this continues, you just get a certificate of graduation," said class teacher Mallory when she was already in the 5th grade. "And that shouldn't concern you," the girl replied defiantly. Her mother didn't even look human anymore. Lucy realized that no one would lose her at home, so she went out and did whatever she wanted. "Where have you been?" her father would ask her when he came home from work. "Out for a walk," was all she'd say. But by and large, he didn't care about his daughter. He'd pack up his fishing gear and leave. Mallory woke up in the morning. She was going to school. She was 14 years old. Her mother was lying on the couch, her arm dangling to the floor. "Mom, you again?" Her daughter wanted to lift her hand, but that one fell back involuntarily. The girl was frightened. She began to shake the woman, but she could not wake up. "What are you doing?" She wasn't little and she wasn't stupid. Mallory squatted down. Listen, the mother's heart was no longer beating. The girl sat down on the floor, leaned her back against the wall. She cried to the point of tears. She heard the key turn in the keyhole, but Mallory sat still, unmoving. "Why aren't you at school?" Her father came in, staring at her. "Mom died," the daughter said through her tears. "You're drunk." Alexander got angry. "Why did you do that?" Mallory looked at him. "I'll be right back. I should have called." The man went to the neighbors. They had a phone. He called the doctors. They came and took the body away. And then there was the funeral, where Mallory looked at the woman who was her mother. She knew she was gone. "So that's it. It's just you and me now." The man hugged the girl. "Hurt," was all the girl said that day. Mallory's studies never corrected. She decided she didn't need it at all. The girl was constantly being called to the principal's office. She was blamed for everything. "I don't need your school," she said in a loud voice to the principal. "So go away." Could no longer tolerate her behavior at school. "And I'll leave." She turned around. The girl saw nothing good in her life, so she followed in the footsteps of her parents. She got involved with a bad company. They go out till morning, hang out at someone's house. "Mallory, do you want to end up like your mother?" her father asked her. He tried his best to get his daughter out, but time was running out. She was on her own now. "Aren't you going to study?" Alexander asked her. "Tell me why I need it." She looked at him defiantly. He was sitting in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil. "Now commerce is developing. I will work in a stall and then look, and then I'll have my own," Mallory said with such confidence, as if she already had something. "Don't say oops before you jump," grinned her father. He thought back to his youth. How ambitious he'd been. He also thought everything in life would be easy. His friends went to the neighboring town to enter the technical school. Mallory rushed with them. "What if it works out?" The girl told them. Well, they laughed. Naturally, Mallory didn't get in. She wasn't going to leave yet. She liked this town. Compared to her hometown, there were a lot of cafes and different eateries here. That's where she met John. "Why, it's so beautiful and alone." He came on to her then. "I didn't ask you." The girl also answered him. "Let's go to our place." He nodded at the table where two other guys were sitting. "There you go." She was cracking up even though she hadn't eaten anything since this morning. "Come on," the guy kept up. "He did," she said grudgingly. "Guys, there's a girl here." They came to the table. "Hi." They didn't show much interest. "Should I order something?" the young man asked. I don't know, she was indifferent, though she wanted to shout, "Yes, order me some food," but she couldn't do that. "Okay, I'll do it myself." He went to the counter. After that, he brought a couple of cakes and tea. "Thank you." Mallory carefully took the food and started chewing. After the guys got to know each other, John invited Mallory to visit. She didn't refuse because she had been sleeping around for a long time. When she could sneak into a girl's dorm, she was there. Otherwise, at some acquaintances. "Are you brave?" he asked her. "What are you talking about?" She really didn't understand. No reason. He looked away. "Do you live alone?" The girl got curious. "Why would you do that?" He was busy putting on a duvet cover. "Just to find out," she hummed. Done, he made her bed. Mallory lay down. John started to lie down next to her. "You what?" She jumped up. "What did you think? It's all for nothing." He turned to her. "You're a freak." Mallory realized she wasn't going anywhere. They spent the night together, and then the girl thought she'd stay with the guy for a while. She had nowhere to live, and he had his own apartment, and he had money. John also didn't mind. There was a girl who could clean and cook. He was taking advantage of her. "You're going out again," he told her once again. She put on her lipstick, put on her shoes, and went out. Mallory wanted to get a job somewhere. She'd been turned down almost everywhere, and rightly so. She didn't even have a high school education. "Will you go and wash dishes?" the owner of the local cafe asked her. "I'll go," rejoiced the girl. She needed to get a grip at least somewhere, and then she could take another position. "Well, then come back tomorrow," the future boss told her. After that, happy Mallory went home. "What's today?" John went out into the hallway. He thought she was doing something bad, but he wasn't repulsed. "Got a job," she mumbled over her shoulder. "I see, So congratulations are in order. He followed her into the kitchen. Congratulations, she turned and looked at him. Why are you looking at me like that? He looked around to see if anyone was behind him. I don't know what to do. She was really thinking about leaving the guy now, but she was afraid to do it. Understandably, just when the money glimmered ahead, she immediately decided to run away. He went to the room. Mallory didn't follow. She was alone. The girl sat in the kitchen, drinking tea, and thought, why in her life everything is so? Why she, like that Cinderella, did not meet her prince, and she has to just exist? Well, you're not coming, are you? John came to her. Now, she decided not to chop off her shoulder. Everything was comfortable here for now. She went into the room, and they began to get ready for bed. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day, so they needed to get some sleep. Don't, she pulled his hands away from her. Come on, I missed you. He started to whine, but Mallory remained unapproachable that evening. The next day, she began to choose what she would wear. Almost all of the clothes were bright and provocative. The girl didn't know how her boss would view it. She chose one dress that was below her knees, but it was so old and stretched out that she didn't even want to put it on. Hello, said Mallory hello to the women in the kitchen. They showed her to her workstation. Mallory began to work. How hard it was. So many dishes were piling up that her back was falling off. How are you coping? After a week, Selena Georgievna, who ran the place, came to her. So far, she looked back at the sink, where the dishes never dwindled, no matter how much Mallory washed them. One of the waitresses is leaving. Will you take her place? The woman asked her. When? She wanted to drop everything and go out into the hall right now. I don't know. She didn't talk about it yet, just hinted, watching the boss, how others work. Yes, I agree, but don't give the place to anyone else, Mallory asked Selena. Okay, as long as she promised, she smiled. The woman immediately saw some potential in the girl. She'd been like that herself, cocky and arrogant. And when this young girl came into her cafe, she felt a kind of maternal pity for her. Mallory worked honestly, though she was like that, but she didn't want to lose her place, especially since she had been offered to be a waitress. She liked the hostess too. She couldn't say why, but there was something about her. You can start another job tomorrow, Selena told her. She allowed her subordinates to call her by her first name without a middle name. Thank you for believing me. She was the only one Mallory talked to like this calmly. Great, you'll thank me later when you open your own cafe. The woman winked at her. Mallory was enjoying her work now. She wore her short skirts, brightly painted, saw that men paid attention to her. They left the occasional generous tip. Hey, beautiful, a man in his late teens slapped her on the rear end once. Good day to you too, she turned to him. Sit with us? He asked. Not supposed to, she wanted to move on, but the man grabbed her arm and sat her on his lap. Don't you know me? He whispered in her ear. Back off you, she pulled away from him. Oh, I like those, he laughed. Austin, leave the girl alone. The hostess came out into the hall. That's it, Selena. He looked at Mallory and winked. That was it, she wanted to show in her tongue, but she restrained herself. There were many more who liked the girl. They grabbed her, tried to pinch her, but she waved them all away. One day, Mallory was walking home and a car pulled up beside her. Get in. It was the same Austin driving. No, she was walking by. Are you stupid? He asked her. No, she was walking on. Stop. He tried to talk her down. Leave me alone. Mallory was just scared of him. Wait a minute. The man had already gotten out of the car. Come with me. I'll make you rich. Gold, you say? She stopped and looked at him. But the man didn't care anymore. He looked at this young, pretty girl and was ready for anything. Yes, nodded Austin. Let's go. She got in the front seat. They drove to his apartment. For some reason, I thought you had a house, she said. I wonder why. He pulled out a cognac. I don't know. She was looking at what was on the shelves. Well, Mallory, come on, to introductions. He handed her a shot. Come on, she took one for courage. The next day, the girl told Selena everything. You be careful with him, she warned him. Why? Could something happen? The girl looked at her. It could, the woman smiled oddly. But Mallory didn't believe that Austin could hurt her. He was so good, loving her, dusting her off. She decided not to think about this conversation. If anything was going to happen, she could always stop it. She had to go to John's to get her stuff. Austin, Let's go to the place where I used to live, she asked her new roommate. Why do you need all this old stuff? I'll buy you new stuff, he told her. Okay, she'd sit on his lap. Mallory liked it when a man treated her like that. She couldn't have wished for anything better. But one night his friends came over. Get out of here, he commanded her. Austin, what are you doing? She couldn't believe he could talk to her like that. I said leave us alone. He gave her a stern look. I'm not going anywhere. She lifted her head and stood like that further away. He walked over to her, took her elbow painfully, and almost on his way, led her out of the room. I love you, of course, but when I have visitors, they must not see you, the man resented. What secrets? She held on to her sore arm. I'd said all, you walk back. Mallory took offense at him. She sat in the kitchen. She wanted to cry. What to do? Live for the money or leave? She walked quietly to the bedroom, opened the nightstand. Mallory saw that Austin kept money there, took some, and went into the hallway. The things were pitiful, but there was no time at all to pack them up. She ran out of there, her heels glistening. Selena, she came to the boss. I see it started. She looked at Mallory's view. What started? She didn't understand. Nothing, she waved her hand. I'll probably quit and leave here. He'll find me anyway, Mallory said, confused. I'm not holding out, the woman waved her hands. At first there was chaos in her head. The girl didn't know where to go. The first thing she decided to do was to go to the train station. There was a train on the platform. She went to the ticket office. I need a ticket for the next flight, she told the woman. It leaves in 15 minutes, she said, and handed her a ticket. Mallory smiled. Her adventure was beginning again. She boarded the very same train. It was traveling northbound. The girl went to bed, and in the morning when she woke up, she got right off. She didn't know what station this was, or if there was anything here at all. Hello, she stopped near a man who got in her way. Where can I get a room here? My place, he was looking at her. Good, she was happy. She just arrived and she was so lucky. Together with Harvey, they walked towards the houses. It turned out to be a small village. Mallory liked it at Colia's place, but only that he lived here, a little embarrassed. Don't be afraid, he said. Everything will be all right. But not a week later, Harvey had a drink somewhere and came home. Mallory was asleep, and he was all over her, and she didn't even squeak. In the morning, Mallory wanted to pack up and run away, but Harvey came out to her. Don't be offended, I liked you, he said guiltily. Yeah, you could have asked nicely, she said. All right, stay here, we'll live. I'll help you with your job, he offered. Good. There was nowhere else for her to go. From then on, she had a new roommate. Harvey did help her get a job, but that wasn't Mallory's dream. He himself worked as a repairman when needed. He would go out on commission, helping people make repairs. Mallory had started doing that too. At first it didn't work out, but then she got the hang of it. We're going again tonight, he told the girl of the evening. How, we're just from the order. My arms fall off, almost cried the girl. No money? Stay home. Harvey didn't talk much. And Mallory was on her way. Somehow the man had already finished all his business, but Mallory still had work to do, and she stayed. Soon the landlady came in. Oh, you're still here. She was afraid the light was on. Yes, not much left, showed her Mallory. When the girl had done everything, the landlady offered her tea. No, thank you. Mallory wanted to get out of here and go home and go to bed. He's cheating on you, the woman muttered as Mallory was about to leave. What? Who? She turned around. You're Harvey. The landlady came up to her. In fact, he's getting more. How's that? Mallory was puzzled. I saw how much money he gave you last time, and he got several times as much, she said. What an asshole, Mallory said angrily. She could see herself coming home and telling that asshole everything. Listen, why don't you get a job? There's a need for young professionals. The landlady looked surprised. And I don't know where. Mallory felt a rope of salvation tugging at her. I'll write you an address. I think they give you a place to live there. The woman scribbled a couple of lines on a piece of paper. Thank you. She left the apartment. She didn't want to go home, but she had to. She gritted her teeth and did it. Nicolay was gone. Mallory figured he'd come back drunk again. That's how it turned out, and so that there would be no scandal, she agreed to everything. Already in the morning, the girl was at the very same address. They were really looking for a worker there, and her candidacy was suitable. She was glad, although the labor was a little bit hard for her. I was told that you provide accommodation. She looked at the man who was talking to her. Yes, but these are just ordinary carriages, he said and pointed to a row of them. I agree, she didn't need more. Okay, go get the key, he showed her. Mallory didn't know how she was doing it all. She had actually found a job, and they were offering good money too. Now she was not only earning money here, but she was also going to other people's houses at the instinct of old clients. Mallory, hi. She was approached by a man who lived here. Hey, she'd only known Harry for a few days. Look, I saw you the other day, and I couldn't believe a pretty girl like you could work here, he said. You say that too, she showed him her hands. It's true, he stroked her palms. Mallory had settled down a bit here. She wasn't such a tosser anymore, though she enjoyed yelling at someone. Look, let's live together. You're single, I'm single. What's stopping us? He suggested it. What are you doing? She looked at him. Why, it's difficult here, and here everything is ready. He did not insist, but spoke with pressure. Well, no, she got up and walked off. After that, Harry began to look after her. Where there was anything that needed help, he was right on top of it. Harry, I told you I don't want anything from you. Mallory was getting tired of his advances. I'm just doing this out of the goodness of my heart. He looked at her and smiled. Why don't you want to go out with him? You don't have anyone else? Her partner asked her. Listen, this is my life. I want a rich and self-sufficient man, not this driver, she nodded in his direction. Well, sort it out yourselves, or I'll be blamed later, the woman continued her work. The courtship continued, but now it became more insistent. One day the employees gathered to celebrate something. Mallory herself does not know, but she found herself in bed with Harry. Apparently he was very persistent. It did happen. She put her hand over her eyes. So are you going to say yes now? He asked. Oh, Harry, don't bother, she looked away. Come on, Mallory, we'll make a full apartment out of our 2 carriages, all with our own hands. He hugged her from the back. At first Mallory resisted a little, but then she got bored with it. She figured it wouldn't take anything away from her. Harry took advantage of that. And now he's standing in front of her door with flowers. Marry me, he says, smiling through his 32 teeth. Are you out of your mind? She looked around to make sure no one was around, or the rumors would spread. He didn't understand why 2 people couldn't live without each other. Come in, she let him in. Well, have you given up? Asked her partner at work. Why would she do that? Mallory was ashamed of herself for saying she didn't need him, and now it turns out she did. I saw you 2 whispering in the corners, her friend kept finishing the wall. So what? Mallory didn't understand. She always did what she wanted, so now she didn't understand what they wanted her to do. Nothing, if he proposes, take it and get married. She got nervous. And don't yell, Mallory told her in the same tone. They never spoke again. The girl was returning home. She had already made up her mind that she would accept Harry, both an assistant and a good lover. And he didn't need any invitations. He was already sitting on Mallory's porch. Hi, he stood up and greeted her. Understandably, she stood, not approaching him. Mallory, you got an idea or not? He came up to her. Yes, I've thought about it. That's it. Come on, make up your mind. She stood there and said it to him with a grin. That's it. You'll be the happiest. He was very happy. They applied. They were quickly signed in. There was no line. From that moment, Harry and Mallory started living together. He made arrangements with the men as promised. They pulled his wagon up to the same one that belonged to Mallory. Only then did he go to buy material for exterior and interior paneling. Harry, I didn't expect this from you. She saw how well he was doing. You know, I didn't think I could do it myself. Someone told me, showed me he wasn't bragging, just telling me the facts. And it's kind of a family, and Mallory's calmed down. She couldn't say that she was very fond of the man, but compared to all the others, she had some feelings for him. Mallory, look at your Harry's hands, her co-workers sometimes told her. Why do you admire him so much? She didn't understand. If the truth be told, she was afraid of her feelings, because every day Mallory realized that she was falling in love with this man more and more. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew about it. Where are you going? She asked her husband. What's with all the suspicions lately? He didn't understand her. It's just that before he never went anywhere, but lately he's been frequenting. By that time they had lived together for 2 years. Are you jealous? He smiled. Finally he achieved that his wife loved him. Now let her run after him, not he after her. She didn't want to give away her feelings. That's why she hurt her husband. From that moment, she had to do everything so that he would not suspect her close attention and love. Perhaps if she hadn't acted that way then, there would have been nothing wrong with her life, because Harry loved her and wanted her to be happy. You can't live in a sick relationship, and everyone knows that. And if you're suspected at every turn, you'll become one. I'm home. She came home from work. In the hallway, she noticed Harry had already returned, but there was also a woman's pair of shoes standing there. Mallory shook. She couldn't get control of herself. The girl went into the room. "Ah, Mallory, hello." Her husband stood in front of her. A young woman was sitting on the couch. "Who's that?" she asked with a numb tongue. "What are you? What's wrong?" Harry was scared for her. I ask again, "Who is this?" She pointed her finger at the girl. "Meet my sister. This is my sister. She came to visit just a few hours ago," he said more than confidently. "Lord, you scared her." She sat down on the couch. "Mallory." "Victoria," chirped the young guest. "Why didn't you warn me right away?" The wife still couldn't believe it. "About what?" "I didn't know," he said calmly. They sat together for a while, and then Harry went into the kitchen to make dinner. He whistled a tune to himself. "Everything is ready. Come into the kitchen," he called out to the girls. They ate, and afterwards Victoria wanted to go for a walk. "You go, and I'll lie down for a while," Mallory said and went to her room. Harry and his guests quickly dressed and went out. Mallory lay quietly on the couch. For some reason, there was some satisfaction today. In the morning, the girl woke up and quietly, so as not to wake anyone, began to get ready for work. It seemed strange to her that Harry was lying on the floor next to his sister. Probably came in last night and lay like that, didn't want to wake her up. She washed her face, got dressed and left. "Hi," said Mallory hello to Maddie at work. "How's it going?" she asked her. "You know, I don't feel so good." Mallory couldn't explain her condition. "That's good." Her partner was happy for her. They had worked all day. In the evening, when Mallory was coming home, she saw Harry and Victoria walking towards her. "Are you going out with us today?" her husband asked her. "Look, you work too. Don't you get tired?" she asked him. "I took a few days off," the man admitted. "I see what you mean." Mallory walked past them. She walked into the house, her anger a little added. There was nothing in the kitchen or refrigerator. "You've been home all day and you couldn't even cook anything," she shouted to her husband and Victoria. "Don't swear, please," Harry asked her. "Fine." She turned around and got up to the stove. Before long, Victoria was scrambling to get home. Harry groomed her in every way he could. Eventually, he volunteered to walk her to the train. "Okay, if it's not too much trouble, you can walk her." Mallory didn't mind. She'd been feeling really bad lately for some reason. She had to go to work, but she couldn't get up. Her whole body was twisting and her stomach hurt. "Mallory, are you home?" Her friend Ariana came in. "Lucia, I'm here," the girl moaned. "What happened?" She ran into the room. "How are you here?" "It was the beginning of the day. Just you did not come, so I decided to find out what happened." Her friend sat on the edge of the sofa and stroked her arm. "Harry left to see his sister off, and I felt sick, so I laid down to let it go," Mallory admitted. "Well, you go on, lie down, and tomorrow come back." Maddie got up and went to work. Her husband came back late. It was almost night. "Did you walk all the way to her house?" Mallory was annoyed as usual. "I'm going to bed. I'm tired." Harry didn't say anything else. He just walked to his room and laid down there. Mallory didn't care about him. She wanted to drink some soothing tea and go to bed too, so she did. It was much easier in the morning. "Good morning." She made her way to the kitchen where Harry was already there. "Good morning." He was pouring boiling water into mugs. Mallory stood and looked at him. Usually, at this point, he kissed his wife, but today that didn't happen. "Harry," she stood with her hands at her sides. "Why are you looking at me like that?" He didn't understand. "Okay, bygones," said Mallory, now did not want to argue and find out the relationship. The girl got ready and went to work. "Well, how's your health?" Maddie already met her. "Good, but yesterday was disgusting." Sat down on Mallory's chair. They set to work, which was a lot of work. Since Mallory didn't come out yesterday, they had to do several times as much today. "Look how unevenly you've done it," Mallory showed her friend. Ariana asked Mallory, thinking half the night, which sister was Harry seeing off. "Vika." She stopped work. I knew Alyosha before you, but he didn't have any sister. Lucia looked up at her friend. What? It can't be. Mallory couldn't believe that she was treated like that. And where? In her own house, are you sure? I can't say with complete certainty. Ariana looked her in the eye. I have to go home, Mallory said. What's the use? He's not there anyway. Ariana didn't think her partner might leave again. And I don't need him. I'll leave his belongings and let him go to his sister's house or his mother's. Mallory cried and cried. Will you think of throwing away men like that? Ariana wanted to stop her. That's it, I'm gone. The girl slammed the door. She didn't remember how she got to the house. She opened the door. Harry was gone. She frantically started throwing his things into her bag. After that, she looked around to see if she had forgotten anything. Mallory opened the door and pushed the things out the door. What happened here? My husband came home from work. I want to ask you about Victoria, who's been living with us for so long, and I was a fool to believe she was your sister. Mallory couldn't stop. What are you talking about? She really is my sister. Harry walked around picking up things that were right on the ground. Proof? Mallory put her hand out in front of her. I don't have any, he stammered. Can anyone prove to me that this is your sister? His wife asked him. No, he didn't look at her. Why are you averting your eyes? Mallory was very angry. She felt like if this Victoria was here, she would just tear her to pieces. Mallory, he was gonna say something, but he stopped. What? She didn't do anything either, she just stared. Yes, it really wasn't his sister. He glared at her defiantly. What? The girl's breath caught. Remember how you've been treating me lately, consumerist. You've been all the time only needing something from me, fetch, serve, no feelings, nothing, he shouted. And why are you yelling at me now? Why did you bring her to the house? We could have met somewhere else. She raised her voice too. He couldn't rent her an apartment. He couldn't leave her on the street. They were saying things to each other in very loud tones. Go away. Mallory sat down on the nightstand, covered her face with her hands and cried. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something. Go away, she was adamant. Harry walked out. He looked back at her one more time and then just closed the doors and left. A few weeks later, Mallory found out she was expecting a baby. She would definitely not have a relationship with her husband. All she wanted was to file for divorce and move on with her life. Maddie, I'm having a little one, she told a friend at work. Oh, honey, congratulations, she hugged her. Yeah, I'm gonna be a single mom, Mallory proudly announced. Why single? The baby has a father? Ariana asked, and then she was silent, blaming herself for telling Mallory about her sister. Not a day went by that Mallory didn't cry. Every night she came home, she was hurt and resentful for everything he had done to her. She remembered the first time he held her, how she didn't want him to. And after all that, looking at the man's potential. So what? He'd repay her in the same coin. Now it was her turn to love and ignore him. You need to leave, her friend advised. And go where? Mallory looked at her with tearful eyes. I don't know, go to your father's, Maddie suggested. She didn't know much about it, but at least there was an apartment there. Right, and the baby would be born there. Mallory was grateful for the advice. She packed her bags, and in a week she left the small settlement. But she never reached her father. On the train, a man was traveling in the same seat as her. Hello, he said to her as soon as the girl entered. Good afternoon, she didn't look at him, just walked past him and dragged her bags through. Mallory wanted only one thing, to lie down and sleep and not to be touched. Let's get acquainted, he held out his hand to her. Let's not, she took her slippers and everything else out of her bag. Oh, you're such a naughty girl, the man teased her. This has nothing to do with you. Mallory finally looked up at him, and in that moment she realized she was lost. His sky blue eyes engulfed her. What's wrong? The man noticed the change in the girl's expression. My name is Mallory, and you? She changed her anger into mercy. Alexander, he held out his hand again. That's my father's name. Mallory didn't know how to keep the conversation going, so she said whatever came to mind. Mallory, are you traveling far? They started talking. Now she was no longer ignoring any of his words. No, she shook her head. I haven't been home in years. I'm going to see my mother. He began to tell her about his life. Good, she nodded, but she herself thought, call me with you. What's good? Alexander didn't understand. Everything is fine, she smiled like a fool. And come with me, he didn't know why this young woman had caught his eye. And I will. She did not break down. because he could refuse at any moment. That was good. They had to get off at some station and buy a ticket for Mallory onward. The whole next trip they talked about their future plans. And how could you agree with me so quickly? I'm a complete stranger. Alexander asked her. And I have nothing to lose, she simply answered. When they arrived, the woman met them cautiously. And rightly so, she was expecting her son alone, and he came with his fiancée, and he got on the train without her. Son, will she also live with us? The woman asked at the gate. Well, we will not leave her on the street, he smiled. Why not? The woman pretended to be a fool. All right, that's enough joking, Mallory. Come in, he turned to the girl. I don't want to embarrass anyone here. She knew she wasn't welcome. And you're not bothering anyone. Alexander was sure of that. But not a couple of days passed as the mother showed her true face. She constantly nagged the girl. Every step that was not so was condemned. Mallory could see that Alexander was beginning to notice it. Something had to be done about it. Why don't we go back? She asked him. You know where I worked. I have nothing else. When I went, I burned all the bridges, the man admitted. Nothing. I have a father. He lives in the apartment. We can go to him, said the girl. She did not know anything about the man she called father. Since she left him, she had not written or called him again. I don't even know, Alexander began to say. But Mallory was persistent, and she quickly managed to talk the man into coming with her. And now they were back on the train, talking about nothing. Can you imagine? We fell in love with each other in just a few minutes, he told her. Do you want the truth? Mallory looked at him. Of course, he nodded. Then on the train, and she told him all about it, and how her husband had left her, and how she was driving away from him, and how she'd fallen in love with his eyes. What a story. He moved over to her. Are you divorced? He asked. Yes, but there's a nuance. She lowered her eyes to her stomach. Are you pregnant? Alexander exclaimed, and it was unclear whether it was an exclamation of joy or surprise. Yes, Mallory decided not to hide anything. Business, he thought, but after a few minutes he hugged her. I'll raise her as mine own. They arrived, stepped out of the carriage. Mallory didn't know how to come to her father, what to say to him. After all, it had been so many years. They got to the house where she had spent her childhood, walked into the driveway. Hello, Daddy. She entered the apartment. Hello, the man seemed taken aback. We'll stay with you for a while. She put the bags on the floor. I thought you were dead, was all the man said. Well, as you can see, I'm alive and well. I'll give you a grandchild soon. She stroked her belly. Mallory, the father, was not sentimental, and he was not capable of tenderness either. He seemed to want to hug her, but instead, he clenched his fists, squeezed his eyes shut, and went to his room. Come in, why are you standing there? She said to her new suitor. He took off his shoes and went into the room where Mallory had shown him. They settled down. Their father was hardly noticed in the apartment at all. Oh, Alexander, I can't. My stomach was so big that I could have pushed the girl and she would have rolled away. Shall I call the doctors? He asked her. No, not yet. She didn't know why she didn't want to. But when she couldn't stand it anymore, Alexander didn't wait. He called a medical team. We're taking her away, said one of the men in a doctor's uniform. Mallory was brought to the labor and delivery room. Before she could even realize it, there was a slap, a sharp pain, and she was told she had a boy. Anthony, Mallory said. Congratulations, Mommy. Everyone in the room was smiling. Just a little more and a terrible thing could have happened. The next day, under the window of the ward in which Mallory was lying, there were two Alexanders, a father and a lover, and she was showing them her firstborn. Mallory saw that her grandfather was crying. She wanted to hug him. Suddenly she was sentimental, though she had never been. They were discharged a few days later. Alexander offered to adopt Andreyka, but Mallory did not want to. Father helped with everything. He went grocery shopping, and he never asked for money. Alexander, and you are going to sit on my father's neck for long? Asked her husband Mallory. They signed with him. Wait a little, let me get used to it, he looked at her. And what to wait? The child wants to eat, she practically shouted. Alexander didn't mind working somewhere, but he couldn't find a job. One day he came home happy. What, you found a job? My wife realized. Yes, now I will go out on trips on a KMAZ, he bragged. Where's the car? Mallory didn't understand. I'll get it from my mother the other day, he said, and Mallory exhaled because she thought he was crazy. That's good, at least there'll be some money. She snuggled up to the man she loved. Mallory herself didn't understand how this could have happened, how she could have fallen in love like this. But when she hugged the man, a wave of trembling went through her whole body. She couldn't help it. It was evident that Alexander treated her with the same love. He loved Anthony as his own. That was out of the question. "Well, everyone, on your way," he said goodbye to his wife and son. Be careful, she couldn't tear herself away from him. The first time it was scary both to go and to let him go. But afterwards, when it had already become a habit, it became the norm. It all began when Andriushka was 5 years old. Alexander returned from a voyage. He came home. Mallory wanted to approach him, but he pushed her away. "What are you doing?" She couldn't understand, and then she smelled alcohol. "Nothing," he told her gruffly. "Alexander, what happened to you?" She couldn't understand it. "Nothing," he told her in syllables. "Why are you treating me like this?" She wanted to know. But Alexander had become withdrawn. He would often have a drink after a voyage, alone in the kitchen. Mallory told him that it wouldn't end well, but he didn't listen to her and pushed her away. One day, Alexander got so drunk that he couldn't get up from his chair. Mallory came to help him. She took his hands and tried to lift him up, but he looked at her with a look that made her afraid. In the morning, when she wanted to talk to her husband, he just walked away from the conversation. "You again?" She watched the man walk toward the refrigerator. "Mallory, you better stay out of it," he warned her. "What's going to happen?" She couldn't understand. "It's going to get worse." Mallory's father heard it too. But they didn't take the information seriously, and for nothing. Once Alexander returned from a trip, at first he was normal, hugged and kissed his wife. But by evening the situation had changed. Mallory said something to him, and he just pushed her away. She pushed back, then she got her first blow. That time the father stood up for his daughter. She didn't understand. "Listen, why do you put up with it? Go to your grandmother. She will make you a conspiracy," her friends told her. Mallory looked at them and wondered why she hadn't realized it earlier. Mallory found out where to find the grandmother who knew everything. She went to her house and got a picture of her husband. "Oh girl, everything is bad for you," said the old woman when she looked at the picture. "What's the matter? Is he going to die?" Mallory was afraid. "He won't die, but he'll leave for sure, and then he'll dry up from boredom." The old woman was looking at something else. "I do not understand. Explain normally," almost cried the girl. "He was bewitched, strongly, on the blood," said the grandmother. "Can anything be done?" Mallory asked. "No, as long as you are near, to that one attracts, and when with her, then to you, so and languishes," said the woman and was silent. "What should I do?" Mallory didn't understand. "Leave before it's too late, or both you and your boyfriend will be bad," the old woman said seriously. Mallory did not understand how this could happen and what to do with all this now. She walked back home and thought her life was over. "Daddy, can I talk to you?" She approached the man when she was home. Sure enough, he looked at his daughter. He felt sorry for her for some reason. Mallory sat down on a chair and told him everything. "You know, I think you should do what that woman told you to do," he told her. "Why don't you go see that woman?" She asked for advice. "What do you expect her to do? You've been told she's tainted. There's no way to fix it," Alexander said. Okay, she got up and gathered her thoughts. It was very hard, but through tears and pain, she gathered her husband's things. When he once again returned from a voyage, she told him everything. They embraced and stood like that for a few minutes. "Forgive me for everything," Alexander told her. He was leaving, but not to that woman, but to nowhere. "What am I going to do?" Mallory asked her father. Today, she was no longer the same girl, careless and promiscuous. She was the mother of a child who needed to be nurtured and raised. To move on, her father told her. A few weeks flew by like a blink of an eye. Mallory realized she was pregnant, but it was too late to do anything about it. Once again, she came home in tears. "Now what?" The father looked at his daughter and marveled that she was always going through something. "Daddy, I'm going to have a baby again," she cried. "What's there to cry about? It's a joy," he hugged her. "How are we going to live too?" She was at a loss. "Don't worry, I'll help you with everything," he was sure of it. Life was now turning on a new leaf. In the morning, Anthony had to take her to kindergarten, after that shopping, and then home, cleaning and cooking. But soon Mallory couldn't do any of that. She was admitted to hospital for preservation. If you keep stressing your body like this, You might just lose the baby, the doctor told her. Okay, I hear you. Mallory was angry again at the world and the injustice in it. Her father tried to do everything he could to help his daughter. He had taken over Anthony's care. Now he was tutoring him. Mallory had given birth. She was now the mother of 2 sons. Serioso was born weak. Everyone was worried about him. But he pulled through, and now his life was not threatened. Until he was 8 months old, Mallory stayed home with him, but that time was not wasted. Daddy, can you help me with my loan? She asked the man. I don't get it. He tore himself away from the newspaper. I've come up with a business. I need money to start it. She showed him the notes. My father didn't believe it could work. There was a time when only the fittest survived in business. That's what he told his daughter. But she stood her ground, promised him she'd pay every penny. I have the money. He looked at Mallory. From where? She was discouraged. From the sale of your grandmother's house, he admitted. So why did you say anything all this time? She was already thinking up a plan in her head. I'll give it to you, but if it doesn't work out, you can't blame me. Alexander stood up and walked over to the dresser. Mallory was excited that perhaps now her dreams were destined to come true. She made arrangements with vendors, rented a space. It seemed to her that everything was so easy. Now she would start and the money would flow into her hands. But that didn't happen. It would seem that everything was there, and everything was done like everyone else. But there were no people. Why, no one could say. A month passed. Everything Mallory had bought went sour and spoiled. There was no rent to pay, so they had to give up the idea. Well, her father looked at her. Don't look at me like that, Mallory cried. I warned you, he told her for the umpteenth time. There was nothing to do but get a job somewhere. She went to several stores and stalls. She was hired by a man who ran a diner that needed a bartender, and Mallory accepted. She was on shift every night now. She had to see drunken faces every day. She had to listen to the negativity, but Mallory tolerated it. She had children. That evening she was finishing work. The money was counted and laid on the counter. 2 young men walked into the bar. We're closing up, Mallory said with a smile on her face. We'll be quick, one of the guys answered her. No, I'm going home now. It was morning. She had to sleep for a few hours, then take the kids to school, and then to the garden, and then do the housework. Are you going to yell? One of them came up to her. Mallory was scared. Come on, said the other one. What are you doing? Sticking up for her? The one who was hitting on her looked back. Let's go, since the girl needs to go home. The second kid took his hand. They went out. Mallory sat down. She needed to recover from the shock. And when she stood up, she saw a terrible picture. There was no money on the counter. She had completely forgotten about it. She sank back into the chair and cried. Mallory, what has happened again? The father of the house saw her with eyes red with tears. They stole all the proceeds from me, which is a lot of money, she told him, and tears rolled from her eyes again. How could this have happened? The father realized that his daughter's life was going through a rough patch. He felt so sorry for her that he wanted to do everything to make her happy. Don't be upset. Everything will be all right, he said. Mallory thought she would explain to her supervisor what had happened, but that didn't happen. Do you realize how much you'll have to work for free now? Asked her boss. It's not my fault there are no guards, she cried. I don't know anything, the man told her. Your tears won't help. Mallory returned home. She wanted to lie down and never get up again. Only the children held her. She couldn't leave them and leave their father alone with them. I have to take out a loan. I'll pay it off and get a new job, she told her father. I'll think about it, the man nodded. It was only now that Mallory began to realize why she needed an education. She could have gotten a decent job somewhere. Today she was even ready to go to school, but there was nothing she could do about it. Alexander made up his mind. He took out a loan. He took even a little more money. He also had some savings. Here, give it to your boss. He gave her a wad of paper bills. Daddy, I'll pay you back, she told him. Can we try again, but with minimal expenses? He asked his daughter. What? We tried it. It didn't work. Mallory wasn't as irresponsible now as she had been before. I'm telling you, without any sophistication, Alexander insisted. What are you suggesting? Mallory didn't understand. Open a diner on the highway, a couple of tables, pies or cheburiks and some snacks, Alexander said. Don't you think it wouldn't bring in much revenue? She asked him. Shall we try it? He didn't even ask, he insisted. Suit yourself, but I'm used to it not working out. My eyes were wet. Okay, but without support I will not cope. They sat in the room. It was already late. The children were asleep. The very next day, Alexander called his friend. He knew there was something he could do to help. Archie, hello, he called him. What's up? You never just call. His friend asked him. Remember, you told me that you had a garage somewhere that you didn't know where to put. Alexander asked. Yes, it's mine, but the land is being taken away, so we need to move it somewhere, he said. I'm taking it away from you. Alexander was determined. What do you want it for? Archie was surprised. I have a case, the man evaded the answer. All right, it doesn't matter to me. Take it away for nothing, but you'll take it out yourself, the friend agreed. Agreed, Alexander hung up the phone. He was glad that from the first time and immediately everything worked out. He made a call to another acquaintance who could help with the transportation of the garage. That one didn't refuse, just needed to wait a little. Mallory, it's done, he told his daughter that evening. The man's eyes burning. What? I don't understand. She was confused. Sit down, now I'll tell you everything, he asked her. They again sat at the table for a long time. Everything was spoken. A week later, there was already a garage on the highway. Alexander himself welded a window there, refinished the doors. Furniture could be brought in. They put a table stand, 2 tables, a few chairs. The man bought a stove so that it was possible to cook, and several kinds of liquor, all removed with the paperwork. Well, shall we begin? The father asked his daughter. Come on, she was ready for anything just to start earning. Is there a beer? Mallory shuddered. She hadn't expected someone to come in so quickly. Sure, she turned and smiled. What else? The man waited. There was no food, so he only bought beer. No way. She doubted anyone would stop at the highway at all. But here we go. Mallory couldn't believe it could happen. But the money was coming in and the cost was small. Daddy, if it wasn't for you, she said one day, and then she went over and hugged him. At that moment, she realized that she had blamed him for nothing and had been angry most of her life. Now it was clear that her father was not to blame for her mother's death. What am I? You do everything there. If you didn't work, there would be nothing, she said. Well, without money, I wouldn't have done anything. She went to bed because she was getting tired. This diner on the highway became very popular with those who frequented it. Mallory cooked perfect and delicious pies and chebureks. Everyone liked them, both truckers and ordinary, passing people. The hostess, visitors were coming up to the counter. Now, she would come out and make and sell what people wanted. Mallory, you need to expand, they told her. Not yet. She was tired of standing here. But she knew it wasn't the right time, not financially, not in her condition, and it wasn't the right time. There was one good thing about this place. Almost no one who was in disrepair came in. Daddy, why don't we move to the city? She asked him 2 years later. Are you sure you've already tried it there? He asked. If I was sure, I wouldn't have consulted you. She was cooking dinner. Okay, take your chances. Just don't close on the highway. I'll pick up here. The man muttered. Mallory had found a building to rent. Now all that was left was to think of the rest. She didn't make it a cafe, but just like the track, just snacks and light alcohol. The hostess, just as they opened, a man came in immediately who was poorly dressed and also smelled. Come out, please. Mallory was rude to no one. Che, won't you give it to me? He whistled through slits that were instead of teeth. Mallory went there, to her own place, and here stayed her father. He did his best to keep away the drunks, keep the building clean. There was a profit, and not a bad one, but it was more and more from what was done on the highway. Mallory was glad that slowly, but it was working out. She tried, as much as she could, to spend time with the kids, but it wasn't really working out for her. Mallory, stop renting this building. Let's buy our own, her father said. Where did you get all this money from? She was amazed. I paid it all off, then saved. Nothing. Practically no spending, he smiled. So Mallory, with her father's encouragement, decided to take a chance. She found the right space, tried to imitate Selena, her first boss. I think I found it. Mallory came home one day. If you have enough money, you buy it, he told his daughter. What about the diner? She asked. I'll take care of it, the father promised. Good, there's nothing complicated there. They have a good relationship. Just please don't change if a lot of money comes in, her father asked her. Really? She turned around. Right now, Mallory wanted to be just like the woman from the cafe that stabbed into her memory. She was striving for it. There was so much work to be done, from paperwork to buying inventory to hiring employees. It's not easy, Mallory said at home at night. It will get easier, her father promised her. I hope so, she sighed. Almost everything was ready to open, but Mallory was afraid of something. She didn't have the staff yet. Mallory, hi, a friend from her high school childhood called her. Oh, Selena, how long has it been since we've seen each other? Mallory was surprised she called her. Yeah, here I am visiting. Why don't we get together? She suggested. Of course, Mallory was glad to meet someone from her past. She was getting ready for the evening, picking out a dress because they were going to a restaurant. Hi, friends. Selena looked at her friend with envy. Mallory noticed it, and something in her woke up. She wanted to show off. Hi, how are you? What do you do? She was proud. She saw that Selena was not dressed like her. I'm in my profession. It was kind of embarrassing. Oh, good thing I didn't get in then, she said, and they entered the place. They chose a table, sat down at it. The waiter came over. Though Mallory realized that she didn't need to spend much, since it was such a spending period now, but she wanted to show her friends so much that she went up, even though she didn't have those crusts. Mallory, come on, it's so expensive. Selena looked at the menu and what her friend was ordering. It's okay, I can afford it now. She looked at the waiter to come over. When everything was already on the table and her friends had a couple sips of wine each, upset, Mallory realized that she had absolutely nothing to talk to her ex-girlfriend about. She wasn't going to tell her what she'd been through over the years. Can we sit down with you girls? Two young men approached them. Yes, of course, Mallory tilted her head. You what? I do not agree. I came to talk to my friend, and it turns out that it is not. At home I have a husband, she said and got up from the table. You're welcome. Mallory smiled at her. Selena was horrified. She didn't expect to be treated like this. So are you leaving? Asked the man who had been watching and listening to all of this before. No, why not? I'm staying. Mallory smiled at him as best she could. Have a seat. The friends took a seat at Mallory's table. You're sorry. We didn't mean for that to happen to your friend, said the same man. It's okay. I haven't liked those upstarts since high school. She sat with her head held high. I'm Billy, and this is my friend Frederick. He introduced himself. Nice to meet you, Mallory, she smiled. What a lovely name, Billy said. Thank you, she nodded. Everyone sat around the table. There was pleasant conversation. When slow music started playing, Billy asked Mallory to dance. They moved to the beat of the music. She was flattered by the men's attention. It had been a long time since she had been with anyone while she was dealing with her own issues. I'd like to meet you again, her new acquaintance told her as he walked her home. I don't mind, she told him, where she wants to open a new cafe. I'm surprised that such a fragile girl is doing such things. He appreciated her act. They parted. Mallory went home. She kept thinking about today's meetings. Why did she do that to Selena? She hadn't done anything bad to her. She decided to call her friend. Hello, she answered. Selena, I want to apologize, Mallory began. You've been a slut, and you're still a slut, and your rags aren't going to save you. Selena just hung up. Mallory looked at her father, who was standing in the hallway watching her talk. What did you do again? He asked. Just seeing a childhood friend, she replied. And Bridie? He guessed. Dad, she didn't want to talk about it. Okay, how are things going with the cafe? He asked. It's fine. I met a man today. If everything goes well, he'll help me. Mallory was sure of it for some reason. But if so, did you tell him about the boys? He meant her kids. Of course not, but there's still time. She looked at him with big eyes. Okay, go to your sons. He went to the kitchen. Mallory waited for Billy to call or come, but he was still gone. She was getting desperate, thinking he was just throwing words around, but he showed up within a week. Where have you been so long? She asked him. She didn't know if he was telling the truth or not. Well, the main thing is that he came. She touched him a little. Yes, I could not come, I promise. He looked at her with loving eyes. Come and have a look, she beckoned him. They went inside. Almost everything was finished, but there was still a lot of work to be done. Plenty of room, but he looked around. Yeah, that's what I liked about it. She really did take a long time to find the perfect building. If you need any help, just say the word. I'm always here for you. He walked over and put his arm around her waist. I hope so. Mallory knew how to handle men. That evening, the couple went out for a little while and then they went to visit Billy. His apartment was a little bigger than Verena's, but while hers hadn't been remodeled in a long time, this one was state-of-the-art. "It's nice here," she ran her hand over the wallpaper. "I tried, as I knew you would come to visit me." He helped her take off her coat. They walked into the kitchen. Billy had a counter there, and they sat on either side of it. "Why?" he asked. "Couldn't hurt," she relaxed. Now, Billy poured it into glasses. They just sat and talked. There was no harassment or anything. Mallory was mesmerized by this man. She remembered how she was good with guys and men. This was different. She wanted to do everything for him. "Would you like to stay or walk home?" he asked. Mallory wanted to stay, but she overpowered herself and said she had to go home. "How are things with your boyfriend?" Alexander asked her when she got home. "Everything is fine," she answered and went to her room. There was a lot to do in the morning. Billy called her the next day, saying he would stop by and help her with the appliances and design. "I'm so grateful to you." Mallory really saw the man in this man. "You're welcome," he hung up. They met in her driveway. Mallory got in the car and they drove to the stores. Billy, as promised, helped with everything. He soon met Alexander, who also liked the handsome young man. They did everything together. No matter what happened, Billy was there for them in every situation. "All that's left is to hire the staff and we can open," Mallory told her favorite man. "Yes, I'm so glad it worked out for you," he kissed her. The selection of people began. A woman was chosen to be the cook, a woman who came from somewhere far away. But she was so highly recommended by people that Mallory couldn't help but take her. "Probably one waiter will be enough for us at first," Billy said. "Of course, we'll have to see how people react to all this," Mallory agreed with him. The opening was on her birthday. "My dears, I am so happy that this day has finally come. It took me so long to get to everything I have now." Mallory even cried. "It's gonna be okay," Billy stood by her side. "And I believe you." She looked at him. "And I have another surprise for you." Billy couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Sure, go ahead," she waited. "Mallory, will you be my wife?" He held out a small velvet box to her. "Billy," she looked at the ring and couldn't believe it was really happening. "I don't know why, but you attracted me. I promise to be a good husband, partner, and friend to you. And I will try to be a father to your children." He held her tightly against him. "I congratulate you," the father whispered in his daughter's ear. How everything ends well, one might have thought, but this was only the beginning of Mallory's real story. She turned out to be nothing like she wanted others to see her as. Now she was getting ready to get married. Money really does spoil a person. She had come to buy a wedding dress. "I need a dress," she said in such a tone of voice that she just didn't want to be talked to any further. "Why don't you change your tone and tell me what kind?" A woman came out to her. "I have a wedding in a few days, so I need a beautiful, preferably lush," said Mallory. "Okay, we'll look for something for you," said the saleswoman and went into the depths. She began to take out dresses for Mallory, but she did not like everything. Finally, when she had tried them all on, she threw them in her face and told her that she no longer needed her services. "How dare you talk to me like that?" The saleswoman went at her. "Who are you to raise your voice at me?" "Just a simple shopkeeper," Mallory retorted. "What? And who are you? Have you been up long?" Her mother was an alcoholic and herself the same. The women stood and shouted at each other so much that people who walked by heard everything and looked back. "Look at you and me," Mallory couldn't calm down. "You walked out of my store, and know if you want to buy a dress in this town, you're not going to make it," resented the woman in the store. "We'll see." Mallory turned around and walked out of the premises. Things were not going the way she wanted them to. The bride-to-be really couldn't buy a dress anywhere. Billy was ashamed to admit why this could happen. "So what, you're going to be without a white outfit at all?" he asked. "If nothing suits me," she lied to him. "Well, let's go to the neighboring town. They're to measure," the man suggested. "I do not want, I'll just be in beige." She pulled out of the closet ordinary dress. "All right, you're the bride. You get to choose," Billy agreed. They didn't invite anyone to the wedding, only their relatives. First, they had a wedding ceremony in the registry office, and then they sat in a cafe, which was owned by Mallory. Billy became a real partner of the girl. He knew a lot of things, advised his wife, but he did not abandon his own business. "How do you have time for everything?" They went to bed at night. "I do not know, I am driven by love," he said to her in response, and she pressed her lips. Billy and Mallory had been married for exactly 1 year. and all was well. At first glance, it looked like they were in a business relationship. Maybe it was. "I'm off to work," was the only phrase heard at home. The cafe was bringing in quite a bit of profit for Mallory. She couldn't help but be happy about it. Billy was there for her. "Look, I think we need to increase the staff," he said to her one day. "Okay, I'll see who I can take on," a hostess told him. In her cafe, Mallory was like a queen. She could boss people around, even going beyond their duties. Her husband often made remarks to her about it, but she paid no attention to them. Why do you do that? He didn't recognize her for what she was at work and what she was at home. "Let them be afraid," she said. "You see, at some point, when you feel bad, they'll just turn their backs on you," he told her. "Oh, I don't need them. I have a loving family." Mallory was sure of her words. "Okay, I'll do everything on the financial side, and you take care of people. I won't meddle with you," he agreed with his wife. It was easy to choose waitresses. Only 2 girls came. One didn't fit right away. Her age didn't match. But Mallory took the other one. "You can get to work right now," she told her imperiously. Anna turned around and went into the hall. There, another girl told her what to do and how to do it. "You a little careful. The mistress is a monster. If you do anything wrong, immediately throws out," warned her partner Catherine. "And what are we here, her slaves?" Did not understand the girl. "What about slaves? She pays well. People leave tips," said in a whisper Catherine. "If there will be something unclear, be sure to contact me," admonished the new girlfriend waitress. Well, she went to see what was on the menu. As long as everything was fine, Mallory watched how everything worked. She was satisfied. The family was fine too. But at some point, things changed. First, there was trouble at work. Anna walked into her office. "Why didn't you knock?" she asked her in an uncomplaining voice. "I gave you a voicemail," the girl said. "What's in it for me?" She looked at her. "I wanted to tell you that in your kitchen." Anna raised her voice a little so that she could be heard. "What kitchen?" She didn't understand. "In yours." Anna tried to speak as softly as possible. "Not mine, but ours. You work here too." Mallory gasped with anger. She couldn't believe that this insolent woman could talk to her like that. "Okay, there's mayhem in our kitchen." The girl looked straight into her boss's face. "You don't have to worry about that. Go wash the dishes," she commanded her. "Why should I do the dishes?" Anna was indignant. "I used to wash too, and nothing." The boss was beginning to boil. Catherine came into the office. She saw that her friend went into the office, so she hurried to get her out of there. "What are you doing?" she asked her. "What? I can't even say a word." She was on edge. "Don't go there. She has some problems. We'll all be fired because of you," Catherine asked. Anna went with her, but inside she was angry. They were standing together wiping down the cutlery when Mallory came in. "What are you doing here?" she shouted. "And don't raise your voice at us," Anna seemed to say quietly. "What?" The woman turned to her. "Sorry," Catherine answered for her friend. "Let her say it." The hostess waved her head at Anna. "No." The woman turned and looked her in the eye. "Ah, so I'll have you." At that moment, Billy entered the cafe. "What's going on here?" he asked when he saw how hot the situation was. "Nothing, my love." The woman came up to him. They went to her office and Billy turned around and looked at Anna. "Please, enough already. We're nobody here. We could be on the street at any moment," Catherine begged her friend. "Okay, but if she says anything to me, I will not keep silent." The girl looked towards the office. "I'm going on a business trip," Billy told his wife. "What kind of business trip?" She didn't understand him. "An ordinary one." He leaned over and kissed her. "You got yourself abroad." Mallory narrowed her eyes. "I've got you," he said. "And what were the business trips?" She couldn't understand. "Just a simple, ordinary business trip." He tried to tell her something. Mallory turned away. She didn't say anything else. Her throat was cramping. She wanted to cry, but she held on. What else? To let the staff see her weakness. At home, while her husband was away, things started to get messy. The mother yelled at the kids, took it out on the father. "It feels like you've gone crazy," Alexander told her. "And you don't say a word." It seemed the work environment had now moved into their home. Billy had arrived. He didn't even think it could be like this at home. "What, you're here?" His wife yelled at him. "Mallory, calm down," he told her. "No, I need to know where you've been, she told him. I told you I was on a business trip. You can look at the papers. He threw his briefcase at her feet. I'm not looking at anything, Mallory yelled like a victim. Oh, I'm leaving. Call me when you calm down. He closed the door behind him. Well, go on then. She was indignant. Are you stupid? Her father asked her. What? She turned on him. You might not come back since you're acting like this, Alexander said and went to his room. Let no one come back. She was not herself. Mallory could not calm down for a long time. She sat alone in her room for hours. After that, she thought everything over, regretted that she had done that to her husband. But the woman was not going to call him. Well, and let it roll. She once again hung up the phone when he did not answer. And the very next day, she realized what she had done. Mallory started calling every place Billy could be, but no one knew where he was. The woman cried. She didn't know what to do. Billy came back a week later. Where have you been? Mallory shouted, but then she realized and changed her tone. Mallory, I love you, but if you keep acting like this, I'm going to pack my things and leave, he told her. I'm sorry, she hugged him and kissed him. They started working together again, but Billy didn't trust her as much as he used to. Why are you in the way? Mallory yelled at Anna. Why are you talking to me like that? She asked her. As I want, so I talk. Continued to behave like that with her subordinate's woman. But answer why? Anna wanted to hear the answer to that question. What do you want me to confess? Mallory smirked. At least it's all for a reason, said the girl already in the back of the hostess. It's none of your business. She didn't turn around. Billy put up with his wife's antics for several years. Then one day he went on a business trip again. They're kind of rare, aren't they? Mallory was angry again. Frequent is bad, rare too. Her husband didn't understand. Okay, I'll shut up. She made a motion like she was shutting her mouth. Billy left. Mallory gave all of herself to the cafe. Business was going very well there, but she still kept a tireless eye on everything. One day Mallory went home and decided to go through to see what was going on in the kitchen. Then the woman opened the emergency exit, and there sat Anna. What are you doing here? The girl heard the mistress speak calmly for the first time. Nothing, she did not turn around, but it was heard that she was crying. What's the matter? Why are you crying? Suddenly the woman wanted to ask. What's it to you, sobbed Anna. She did not want to talk. At that moment Mallory remembered herself, how she also went and could not get a job. And after she wasn't hired, she would sit and cry. Why was it her, Anna, that she was taking it out on? Let's talk. The woman sat down next to the girl on the steps. What am I supposed to talk to you about? You wouldn't understand. How do you know? Maybe I was the same. Mallory looked away. I was born in a very poor family. It's even softly said, the girl began to say. So, a lot of people have it. Mallory shrugged. Did you? She turned to her. And you think, when Mallory looked at her life back, she was horrified at what she was doing. Look how you are now. Anna was still crying. It's all my doing, Mallory told her. They sat and talked about everything and nothing. It was the first time the mistress had had a heart-to-heart talk with her subordinates. Anna, calm down and there is no need to get upset over nothing. Mallory stood up. Okay, thank you for talking to me, she was grateful. Go to work, said the cafe owner calmly. Yes. Anna went to the hall and Mallory got ready to go home. Billy was still gone. The woman didn't know what to make of it anymore. Why had the business trip dragged on so long? She was sitting at home when a key began to turn in the keyhole. Billy jumped Mallory up from the couch and went to the door. Hi, he walked into the apartment. What took you so long? His wife asked him and wanted to kiss him. No, me, he took her hands away. What happened? She couldn't understand. Mallory, I'm sorry, I'm leaving, he told her. What? She wanted to scream to cry, but her body felt as if it were restrained. I came to get my things. Goodbye, he walked to the room, packed his things and headed for the door. What about me? She looked after him. You're doing fine, he said without turning around. Mallory stood in the hallway. She didn't know what to do. She went to her room, sat down on the couch. The next day she came to work. Anna was already there. She was wearing a beautiful dress. You said you didn't have extra money for outfits, and today, what are you dressed up in? was surprised by Mallory. "It's new," she spun around in front of her. "I can see that, that's why I'm asking," sighed the landlady. She had cried all night and had no idea what to do now. "My sister came to visit and gave it to me," she said excitedly. Well, Mallory heard her, but did not understand what she said. She went to her room, but she couldn't think about work. She just sat in her chair and stared at one point. Mallory felt like her life was over. She didn't want to live without Billy. And now he was just gone. The woman got up from the chair. She decided to go to her husband's house and talk. So she did. She left the cafe and drove. She thought through what she would say to him, what she would apologize for. Nothing came to mind. She got out of the car, went into the driveway, went up to the floor. There was his door. Her hands went cold. Mallory started to worry. She knocked, heard someone coming to the door. "Who?" a woman's voice asked. Mallory turned white when she heard it. "Mallory, Billy's wife," she answered, still hoping for something. "He told me you could come." A young girl opened the door. "Who are you?" Mallory went at her. "Woman, what are you doing?" The girl put her hands out in front of her. "Fucking juvenile, where's my husband?" Mallory was shocked. "Billy and I have been together for how many months? He's filing for divorce today," she said. "This can't be happening," shrieked Mallory. She ran out of the driveway, wondering what she could do to get back at him. Nothing came to mind. She went back to the cafe. Her work was in full swing. She went up to her office and Billy was sitting there. "Where have you been?" he asked calmly. "Oh, you," she snapped at him. "I see. Why did you go to see her?" He took her hands in his so she wouldn't twitch. "How could you? I loved you and you cheated on me with a teenager," screamed the woman. "Mallory, I met her. I loved her. It's not your fault, but you need to accept it," he said. "I'll sue you for everything." The woman couldn't stop. "Okay, I came to talk calmly and you do not understand, then I'll go," he told her. "Go on," she threw something at him. She couldn't sit still. She went out into the hall. "Anna," the woman called out to her. Yes, she was afraid of being yelled at again. "Come in to see me," called out to her. Anna didn't know why she was being summoned. She went up to the woman, who invited her to sit down. "Just wanted to talk," Mallory said. "Phew," the girl exhaled loudly. "What did you think?" Mallory looked at her. Nothing, shook her head. The girl shook her head. They sat and had a heart-to-heart talk. From that day on, Anna was a fixture in the principal's office. They chatted. She reminded Mallory of her own. "Turns out you might not be so bad," Anna told her. Mallory was telling Anna about her husband leaving her and how much it hurt her. She shared with her. The girl nodded. She sympathized with her mistress. "That's enough. Let's go home," she told her. Anna was still staying put and Mallory was leaving. A few months passed. Anna blossomed before her eyes. "What's going on with you?" Mallory asked her subordinate. "My sister is getting married. She has such a good fiancé. He helps us in everything. Now it is easier," Anna smiled. "Will you invite me to the wedding?" Mallory asked. "Of course," she smiled. "When and where?" Mallory wondered. She remembered the day of her wedding. "I don't know yet, but as soon as I find out, I'll be sure to let you know," Anna smiled. They broke up again. Mallory continued working and figuring out how to get back at her husband. "Let him go," her father pleaded. "I can't. How could he leave me?" Mallory said. "It's your own fault," her father barked. "You never support me," she told her father. "The other day you were apologizing and thanking me, and now," he squinted. "Oh, come on." Now Mallory's life was in disarray. She didn't know what to do, how to be. On one hand, she didn't want to do her ex-husband any harm, but he had hurt her so badly. Mallory sat and realized that she had lived to such years, and she had nothing. No friends, no one to talk to. Children are also not interlocutors. She could talk to her father, but she didn't want to. "Dad," she went into his room. "What should I do?" "Nothing, calm down. Why are you so angry at the whole world?" He only did not shout. "I don't understand it myself." She couldn't analyze these things. A month later, Anna came to her office. She said that in a month her sister would have a celebration. She talked to her, and she agreed to accept her as a guest. "At least I'll take my mind off things," the woman said aloud. She really wanted to relax a little. The cafe was still operating, but it couldn't compete with the establishments that had started to appear. Therefore, the woman no longer had the income she had at the beginning. "Hello." Anna met her on the doorstep of the restaurant. "Hi," the woman approached her. "Come on in," and Anna led her through. When she entered the hall, she nearly had a heart attack. At the wedding table sat the bride and groom, with her Billy being the groom. Mallory stood there, staring, unable to comprehend anything. "Come in," as if nothing had happened, Anna said. "I can't," the girl glared at her. "And you should," the girl took her boss under the arm. And they went. As she sat at the table, she couldn't take her eyes off Billy. How could this have happened? Why had he traded her for this young girl? Somebody offered her food, but she couldn't get enough. When the congratulations began, she too was lifted from the table. "Hello," she said and smiled. She kept her mark. "Well, and congratulations?" asked her guest after a long pause. "Congratulations," she raised her glass and drank. "And I don't want you to sit down," Billy stood up. "I already came to talk to you, but you were so angry that I just left." "Billy, let's do it later." Mallory didn't want to talk to him in front of everyone. "Why later? You don't want one-on-one. You have to do it like this. I want to be honest with you," he looked at her. And Mallory was thinking at that moment, how handsome he was. "Tell me." She got up again. "When you and I met, you were dissing your girlfriend, showing her what a well-to-do woman you were, even though by and large, it wasn't really true. My friend and I overheard this conversation and came over. As it happens, your date had left. But when I got to know you better, you turned out to be a kind and good person. I realized I was wrong about you." The guests began to sigh. They didn't want to hear it. "Billy," Mallory said again. "It's okay, I won't be long. So when I helped you do everything in your cafe, you didn't even thank me, you took me for granted. But I didn't pay attention to it. And then the work started, and what did you do? You had a simple cafe. Yes, it was profitable. And what? You need to feel like you're a queen. So you know you're not. Now that I'm gone, you can't handle it all. Hire a good financier who will do something for you, but not the fact that he won't cheat." Billy stopped for a drink of water. "I don't want to hear it," practically shouted Mallory. "But you're going to have to. So know this, if you're a kind and helpful person, you'll attract the same kind of people to you. And if you're evil and greedy, it's the same. I've seen what you can be." And when he came to the cafe, and there's this poor girl sitting there sobbing, he pointed at Anna. "What has she done to you to make you treat her like that?" "Oh, you," snorted the woman at Anna. "Don't touch my daughter," stood up from the table, the mother of the bride and Anna. Mallory almost fainted. It was the same aunt from the dress store. How could this happen? Was this all done on purpose? She didn't understand. "I don't know," Billy replied, "but after I saw your waitress crying, I put her in the car and asked her what happened. She told me about what you were doing in the cafe, making a mess of it, trying to make you feel like a lady." She didn't want to feel like a lady. Mallory was crying. She just wanted to get out of there. She didn't care what anyone thought of her, just let her go. "Then I brought Anna home, and her mom and sister were there. When the woman told me how you picked out the dresses, I was very surprised too. I knew you weren't like that." Billy stopped talking. "I got you a job on purpose to teach you a lesson. I knew what you were like and I trusted you. There was only one thing that happened by accident, and that was a good thing. I told my sister about it once, and she asked me to show her Billy. She'd seen him from a distance, and then when he was on a business trip, they met by chance, and he fell in love with her. No one forced him to. And at that moment, Mallory looked at the young people. They were so beautiful and happy." The woman drank another glass in a gulp and left the table. She drove home, tears covering her eyes. She began to analyze, and indeed, as long as she was soft and fluffy, and her life was fine, and as soon as she became angry, then everything was wrong. "Where did you come from?" Her father met her in the driveway. "Leave me alone," screamed Mallory, even though she didn't want to do it, but her temper couldn't be fixed. Well, her father didn't argue. Mallory sat in the kitchen, a bottle in front of her, pouring out her grief. "What are you doing again?" Alexander came in and grabbed what was on the table. "Give it back," looked at him, "daughter. If you drink even a sip, I'll stop talking to you for life," he told her. "Daddy, I feel sick," she cried again. "Pull yourself together and start doing something," the man advised her. Mallory woke up in the morning, went to the bathroom, looked at herself in the mirror. There was a pretty woman looking back at her. But if anyone knew what kind of character she had, they would never want to socialize. Starting a new life, she said to herself. The cafe had been given a complete makeover. It wasn't a simple diner now. Mallory had made it a date spot for young couples and more. Everyone who worked for her respected and appreciated the manager. Not because she kept them in line, but because she was calm and reasonable. Mallory, one of the waitresses, came in one day. "Yeah," she looked up at her. "There's a man asking for you," she told her. "All right, let him come in," she told her. Billy walked into the office, and Mallory wondered what he wanted from her, since it had been so many years since they had broken up. "Hi," he sat down at the desk. "Why are you here?" She wanted to know. "How many years and you still haven't forgiven?" he asked. "What do you care?" She wouldn't look at him. "I came to apologize and offer you something," he said in a businesslike manner. "Well, I accept the apology. What's your offer?" She was curious. "Would you like to run a nice hotel where there is a restaurant and everything else?" He asked and sat silent, waiting for an answer. "Why such a question to me?" She didn't understand. "I see how you have everything organized here, so I believe that you will manage there too. And I thought you would do something after our divorce, but you didn't do anything, so you could be trusted," he said seriously. "Well, I'll have to think about it." Mallory looked at him and couldn't believe he'd ever been her husband. "Okay, Billy, I won't think about it, I'll do it." She got up from the table. "That's great, I'm happy for you and congratulations on a good position." He shook her hand. "Thank you." She was glad he came to her. After the man left, she sat for a while longer and went home. In the morning, she put on a new suit, shoes, styled her hair, and went to meet her new co-workers. Mallory knew she wasn't going to yell and swear at anyone. She had experienced firsthand that it never leads to anything good. "Hello," the handsome man smiled at her. "Good morning, my name is Mallory," she told him. "Oh, welcome." He opened the door in front of her. The woman entered the lobby. It was bright and cozy. The team was fully assembled. They didn't know yet who would be their new leader. "Hello, team," she said. "Greetings." Everyone immediately exhaled when they heard that they were not someone's subordinates, but a team. "It is a pleasure to be here today and to see your faces. I hope we will work together and help each other." She believed that was the case. As everyone dispersed, Mallory was approached by the man who had met her. "May I ask what you are doing tonight?" he asked the woman forehead to forehead. "And for what purpose are you interested?" She realized she was beginning to flirt. She liked him immediately. Oliver worked here too. He was a little over 50, graying whiskers and black eyebrows, which made him unusual. "I'd like to ask you out on a date. You didn't try to be sly." "I'd be happy to accept." She averted her eyes, remembering again what Billy had told her about kindness and malice. "Then I'll pick you up at 7. He looked at her. "I'll be waiting." She was glad of the offer. "See you then." He touched her hand and went to attend to his business. And Mallory went to her father to tell him about her new job. "I'm happy for you, daughter." He hugged her. Mallory met with Oliver. They had a great evening. The woman was in awe of what the man knew it could do. He offered her not to procrastinate, but to start dating right away. She did not refuse. Now they are together. Oliver turned out to be a good friend and mentor to Billy. One day he suggested that they all go out together. Mallory said no because she wasn't ready for that yet. "Will you marry me?" he asked the woman a few months later. "You know, it's not the first time I've heard that phrase, but I still can't refuse." She laughed and took the ring he was offering. "Believe me, no one else will tell it to you but me." He hugged her and she smiled because she was happy as she was the first time.